Good afternoon. Buenos tardes. What a beautiful day for a Civic Ambassadors Summit, huh? I'm Martha McCoy, and I'm Executive Director of Everyday Democracy, and it is just such a pleasure to see you all here today. As you know, Civic Ambassadors are folks who have taken this pledge that is in your packets. And this pledge is something that I keep near me and I read all the time because it reminds me of what it is I've committed to do. And I'm just really want to just read one part of it that just always touches me, which is I pledge to devote to working with others across difference to create opportunities for civic participation and engage those I come in contact with in endeavors that will strengthen Connecticut's civic health. And so today we're here to inspire each other, to encourage each other, to learn together, and to remember that when we are connecting with each other and when we're connecting across difference and we're intentionally finding ways to solve public problems together to make our state work for everyone, then we are all better off. And so I just salute you here today and really look forward to hearing from all of you and meeting all of you as well. And so now it's my great pleasure to introduce Tina Prakash, who is the Special Assistant to the Deputy Secretary of the State.
I'm here right now to welcome you on behalf of Secretary of the State Denise Merrill, who's a partner in the Civic Ambassadors program. And I've had the pleasure of working with her for over 10 years now. And it really has been a pleasure because she and I share the common goals of trying to improve access to our democracy and for everyone, and improving civic health, which is slightly different. But so I was asking myself, what is civic health? And I think we all know that it's voting, but it's also so much more than just voting. Maybe voting is the most powerful expression of civic health, but there are so many other ways that we can help our communities. It's being engaged in our community, knowing our neighbors, doing what we can to help each other. If you go to church, if you belong to a bowling league, if you came here today, you're engaging in your community. So there are so many ways that we can do it in our everyday lives. And on such a sunny Saturday in November, I can see that all of you are here because you're eager to engage even more fully with the community, and I hope that we can offer those tools to you today. So being a civic ambassador, what does it mean? We've got this pledge, and Val Ramos, who will be up here shortly, tells me that you can commit as little as 1 hour a week to being a civic ambassador. But I'm gonna challenge you. I'm going to challenge you because you can be a civic ambassador 24/7. You can be a civic ambassador in everything that you do. When I'm at work, I am an ambassador to my coworkers, and I'm an ambassador to the public that I interact with. When I'm with my friends and my family, I'm an ambassador to them. They know how involved I am in government, and I'm happy to share my knowledge with anyone who's interested. And then it's little tiny interactions with everybody that you interact with. It's sometimes a stranger. I went to the store a couple weeks back, to the grocery store, and the woman in front of me in line had 2 very small children. And when we left the line, she was parked near me. And when she got to her car, she realized that she had lost her keys. And she had a cart full of groceries and 2 children. And so I just stayed there with them for a few minutes so that she could go inside and get her keys. That is being a civic ambassador too. I guess I would have been an A-plus civic ambassador if I had talked to her about the importance of voting and talking to her state representative. So I was an A-plus that day, but I did the best. My point is, you can and should organize and vote to speak to your elected representatives, but you can also be a civic ambassador wherever you are. It doesn't just have to be about those sort of high-level things. So I hope when you go home today that you will embrace your role as a 24/7 civic ambassador. Tomorrow, when you're raking your leaves in your yard, say hi to your neighbor. When you go to work on Monday, be open to sharing the civic knowledge that you have with your coworkers. And do spend that hour a week that Val asks for working on the bigger picture in our community as well, because that's important. I hope that's not asking too much of all of you. I mean, you're getting paid, right? You're getting paid for this? No? So anyway, in all sincerity, people like you who show up and commit, you really are the foundation of our democracy, and it makes me feel more comfortable about our future to go home at night knowing that all of you came here today. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for making the commitment. And always feel free to reach out to me if I can be of help in your journey as an ambassador. Tina Prakash, I work at the Secretary of the State's office for Secretary Merrill. Generally, we do voting and civic engagement, which is just right up the alley of what we're doing here today. So thanks very much.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bridget Quinn-Carey. I'm the president and CEO of the Hartford Public Library, and I am thrilled to welcome you here today into the library. And when you think of libraries, you're probably thinking books, right? Which is still our brand and still something that we're incredibly focused on. But even more than books, or just as importantly of books, we are also about learning. But what's applicable, I think, today is that we take our role as a civic institution, as a place that creates opportunities for civic engagement. We take that very seriously, and we do it by partnering with groups like are represented here today and for events like today, but we do it on that everyday basis too, where we create opportunities for people to come together, to explore ideas, sometimes debate ideas, sometimes have conversations about different points of view. And that's what's really important to our democracy and to civic engagement, is that there are these places where forums can come together and talk about ideas and have access to information. And that is also what's a really important part of civic engagement, is having the background and having the information and access, free access to that information that helps us as citizens make informed decisions. And that is a huge role of libraries, it always has been, is to creating and providing those kinds of resources that help you make good decisions. And that can be through a book, it can be through well-vetted online information, and it can be through forums and bringing different people together to talk and discuss ideas. So the library is a perfect place for something like this, and that's why we have a long-standing relationship with organizations like the Secretary of State's office, like Hartford Votes, like so many other civic institutions and organizations here. So I'm thrilled to see that you are once again here at the library. We are very, very proud to host and be part of this conversation. So I hope you enjoy your day and that you will come back and see the library again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bridget Carey and Tina and Martha. And I'm Valeriano Ramos. I'm the Director of Strategic Alliances at Everyday Democracy. I'm also the coordinator of the Connecticut Civic Health Project, which is the sponsor of the Civic Ambassadors program. We're very fortunate to be here at the Hartford Public Library. This is the third Civic Ambassadors Summit that we have held here. So I want to take the opportunity to thank, of course, the Hartford Public Library for hosting us today. Thank you. Thank you very much. On the screen, you will see a lot of other sponsors and partners that have supported the Civic Ambassadors program and the summit this year. There's a long list, of course. I won't be able to mention all of them, but I do want to acknowledge the lead sponsors. Of course, Everyday Democracy, which is the organization that Martha and I are proud to work for, but also the Hartford Public Library, as I mentioned, also the Connecticut Humanities, which funded the keynote speaker who you'll hear from later today, Scott Warren, and so we want to thank Connecticut Humanities for that. Also the Hartford Media Group, they have supported us every year as the lead media sponsor for the summit. And also a new lead sponsor is the Charles B. Cook Fund at the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. So I want to thank all of our lead sponsors and all the other sponsors that you see there as well. We are very fortunate today to have a great keynote speaker and also some excellent panelists and moderators. So to get this started, I want to introduce our first panel. It's entitled Connecticut's U.S. Census Complete Count Campaign. And it's going to be moderated by Ms. Tina Prakash, who is, works for the Secretary of the State's office. We are not able to, Dr. Richard Cho, who was going to join us on the panel, because of family reasons, he won't be able to be here. But we also have Caprice Taylor-Mendez, who will be joining the panel. So at this point, I want to welcome Tina, who will be giving some insights about the Complete Count Committee, the Census Complete Count effort, and introduce our panelists. So thank you. Please welcome Tina Prakash.
So, yes, welcome back, everybody, to our panel on the 2020 census. And actually, we did have a last-minute family emergency come up with one of our panelists, so it's more of an interview than a panel, but we're going to have a great time. So, Caprice Taylor-Mendez and I will have a great conversation about the census and why it's so important for everyone in our community to be counted, because it really is important. Just a quick show of hands. Did anybody here live in Connecticut's 6th congressional district? It doesn't exist anymore. I lived in it.
Trick question.
Yes. So 20 years ago, we had 6 congressional districts, and I lived in the 6th district. And due to the census showing that we had a smaller population, my district was eliminated. So yeah, it was a trick question. And it shows my age too, but that's okay. So that's sort of the most visual thing I can give you as far as how the census affects us. But it also represents your representation at the state government level. So it's possible that you could lose a state representative or a state senator in your district if you're undercounted. And it means dollars. To me, that's really one of the most important things. It's about federal and state dollars that are allocated based on formulas around what our population is, which is determined by the numbers that come out of the census. So if we have people that live in our communities and are not being counted, then that means we're losing the dollars that we deserve to have to support those people. So for every additional person counted, those are additional federal and state dollars that are going to be allocated to our communities. So why would someone not want to be counted? And who's undercounted? For one thing, we can look at the past census data to look at who's been undercounted. That's actually, even though they haven't been counted, it helps. But generally, people who are more transient tend to be undercounted. Homeless populations definitely tend to be undercounted. People whose primary language isn't English tend to be undercounted. And then I think some of you have probably heard about the controversy about whether that citizenship question was going to be on the census. And that whole idea, whether it's there or not, the fact that it was out there in the public leads people that are undocumented to not want to fill out the census because they're afraid that it's going to be given to the wrong people, the information, which by the way isn't true, but I can tell you why on another day. So what are we doing at the state level? We've formed a statewide complete count committee, which is co-chaired by Lieutenant Governor Bysewicz and Secretary Merrill. And the statewide committee we're working to establish complete count committees within each and every one of our 169 towns. So when you go home today, email your mayor and ask if she's established her complete count committee and offer to join it. At the state level, we've also secured $1 million to aid in our efforts. $500,000 is going to be appropriated through the state budget, and another $500,000 has been pledged by local nonprofits. So this is, I guess what I'm getting at is this is a partnership. It has to be a partnership of government, nonprofits, and the community, and you. Having said that, it's my pleasure to introduce Caprice Taylor-Mendez, who's here to discuss those hard-to-count populations and what we can all do to ensure that everyone's counted. Caprice is the Strategic Programs Manager at the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, and she's worked at New Haven Promise, one of the nation's cities of promise, and I hope that you'll tell me a little bit about what cities of promise are.
Sure.
And prior to that, she served as the Youth Services Director for the City of New Haven, managing a $1.8 million budget. As someone who is taking classes in finance and budgeting right now, I'm overwhelmed by that idea, so good for you. And she's had many years of experience working in the nonprofit and youth services field. Caprice was also a founding member of the Thrive in 5 Early Education Initiative in Boston, and she's been active in programs to address out-of-school youth, educational opportunities for students, and special education reform. So, welcome, Caprice.
Thank you
for
so
being
much.
here.
And
So I guess I'd like to offer you a minute to just introduce yourself and make some welcoming remarks, and then we can jump into the questions.
sure, thank you all for being here today. I know there are many other things that you can fill your time with, and it's really important that you're here today because this is what changing the world looks like. It isn't this lofty idea of, I'm going to save the world. It is what you choose to use your time, TV or being in community, that makes the difference. How we treat the person who we just see coming in the other direction on the sidewalk. Someone said to me, I'm going to be a little harsh here, I'm not racist. I don't walk across the street when I see a black man, I say hello. And I said, that just makes you a good person. It's those everyday choices that co-create a kinder and more just world. And when we talk about the census, it's the one chance every 10 years to make sure that everyone in our community is counted. What does that mean? About $3,000 on average per person is what the research showed comes to the state from the census. For children who are here today, it's your future. It's how many of you loved arts in school? It's arts program. How many of you love gym? It's to make sure that we could afford to have a gym teacher. For families with children under 5 years old, that's another hard to count population. And when we talk about hard to count, sometimes it isn't because people don't raise their hand and say, hey, I don't really care about that. I don't want to get counted. There are some real systemic reasons as to why people don't raise their hand and say, I don't want to get counted. So when we talk about hard to count, often there's a history behind there are forces that don't want to count you. And when we talk about the citizenship question, I talked about it on a radio show that it was like a Spanish soap opera, where in Spanish soap operas, there's like this drastic love story. Someone finds out that they had a parent and they didn't know it was their parent, and then someone dies and there's a fight and drama. Those are Spanish soap operas. And when you talk about the citizenship question, I don't know how many of you read some of the news articles. There was a woman estranged from her father, refused to talk to him for most of her life. She was part of a national organization supporting to strengthen democracy here in the US. I can't remember the name of the organization. I don't know if any of you in the audience remember. And she happened to go to a board retreat with this nonprofit shortly after her father had died, forcing her to return to where she grew up in a house that she hadn't been in for years, shuffle through his office papers, and on his desk was an envelope that said, akin to like evil plan. Which I was like, whoa, this is like a soap opera. She opens up the envelope, and in there, she sees a USB drive, receipts from this is a nonpartisan conversation, but what happened was very partisan, from a Republican Party paying her father, who was a well-known Republican strategist in the country. And in those documents, it said, we need to lower the count in urban centers. That was the language, urban centers. One way is to create fear. And so we stick this whole citizenship question into the survey to create fear. Whether or not it actually eventually stays in there, the goal was to create fear to deter people from wanting to complete the survey in urban centers, because the theory went, in urban centers, people tend to vote more Democrat. And so if you deter the urban centers, less people counted in what they assumed to be predominantly Democratic areas, and therefore, for more than 10 years, have control of national politics. That was the evil plan. So when the US Census citizenship question was still being heard in the courts, the board meeting retreat, she mentioned it to one of the staffers and said, hey, I just had my dad pass and I found this weird thing on his desk, bring it to me. And he put it in the hands of those lawyers who were still defending to take out the citizenship question. It all happened with divine timing. And so when I say hard to count folks, it isn't because they don't care. There have been historically systems to try to dismiss people from being counted. And this is just one of those quote unquote evil plans, not a conspiracy theory. All the proof came out with these court cases. So I think New York Times wrote an article, so you could find many of these. So when we talk about hard to count communities, we should not dismiss their reality of, hey, doesn't matter if I raise my hand or not. There are reasons why people feel that way. They may not be able to name why, but it's a reality. So when we're doing work in our communities, bless you. When we're doing work in our communities, not dismissing people's reality, but say, hey, you know what? This system sucks right now. The rebellious messages, make sure you're counted. So we're working with youth, we're working with Latino community members, African American community members, LGBTQ community members, folks who've been impacted by incarceration, folks with children under 5. And the theme that we're using locally in Greater New Haven is don't let them count you out. That's our census message. But I'll share a little bit more with you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for that. You reminded me, my day job is registering voters, and the whole idea of voter registration came about in the United States as a way to prevent immigrants from voting. So I think there's a definite correlation there to what you were talking about. But so let me ask you, we've been talking about the harder to count communities. What are some of the challenges that we face when we're trying to reach them?
I'd say we need to be strategic, meaning I have 4 key elements that I wanted to share with you. So I'm going to share them now, and I might repeat myself later, but with greater detail later. The message is important. As equally important is the messenger. Meaning, I want to talk to young people and say, hey, it's really important for you to get counted. I'm over 40. If they have peers, high school students, making sure that they tell their peers in high school, college students telling their peers in college, that's more powerful. So as an everyday citizen, if I'm a civic ambassador, I won't envision myself to be the best messenger. Maybe my goal then is to gather people and support them in being the messengers to their community and their constituents. So being strategic, and there are limited resources. So nonprofit organizations are often financially constrained, have a lot to do already, and they do need support, they do need volunteers. So finding partners that you can support with. The second piece is partnership. Often we're like, okay, I want to do this and this and this for you. Partnership means, if I'm an ally, what do you need? How can I best support you with the resources that I have? I'd love to go door knocking with you. I love people, but maybe you're not the best person to do that door knocking. Maybe the best way you can support is to find someone who is bilingual or from that neighborhood and recruit them to go with you. Doesn't mean you can't be there, but having a messenger from the community. And more importantly, we're also working with individuals impacted by incarceration. If a person went through that, talking to another person, whether it's voting or whether it's census, hey, I know how hard it is, and guess what? This is why we need to get counted. That statement of, I've been where you are, or I am exactly where you are, and I still feel that this is important, is very strong. The other piece is the sense of eliminating fear, eliminating the sense of I don't matter, and the sense of if I let the government know where I live, there's a lot of fear. The whole strategic paying someone to do the civil plan worked, because there is still a lot of fear. It's not just in the immigrant community, it's also LGBTQ community. It's also, hey, I have a transient housing situation. I'm doubling up in my friend's house with my kids. I can't let Department of Social Services know. There's that kind of fear as well. Messenger is important. I was in a meeting and someone from the US Census Bureau office said, we're trying to recruit landlords to be our allies in this and tell their tenants to fill out the census. And I'm like, no, exactly, my same reaction. And I'm like, no, exactly, thank you. Yes, and so the messenger is just as important as the message. And the last piece is well, there are 2 pieces. Eliminating fear. We cannot eliminate fear. Like, often people think the opposite of fear is courage. No, the opposite of fear is joy. Because you still are fearful of something, and despite feeling fear, you step up and you do it courageously. The opposite of fear is joy. So all of you in this room interested in doing census work, you are in the business, you have signed up, and you are volunteering to create joy. And the only way to create joy is to be joyful yourself. So think of the things that get you out of bed. Think of the places that you've been that really feel good in your skin. And you're like, I want to show up there again and again. And so what does that look like? I've done census work for 2 decades, so this would be my 3rd. And with young people, we had a street party. It was a census street party. Parents came out, did a barbecue, block party, all about the census. Hey, census is not a scary thing anymore. So for the city of New Haven, we're doing an art contest, songwriting contest, and a visual arts contest. Adults and youth can participate. We haven't launched it yet, so you're the first ones to hear about it. And the thought is music making, visual arts making, people thinking about the census, and not in a scary way. It's like, don't let them count you out. How can we step up? And that's the last piece, power. Oftentimes, people that we say hard to count feel they have no choice in the matter and things. When you choose to get counted, you're saying, I matter, and government funds better come and support my community, better come and support the library, better come and support the kids in school to have food during lunchtime, to have art programs. So all the things we care about that government pays for, making sure those dollars come. For the next 10 years, talk about power. Having that household counted, 10 years positive impact in our communities. So reminding people they do have power, and saying yes will impact for the next 10 years. You may not be able to vote, but guess what? This still hasn't been taken away from us.
Is there a question of, have you ever been convicted of a felony or been
No.
incarcerated on the census?
No.
And is there any information of how many people in the state of Connecticut that has a criminal record who can and should be voting?
For the census, they don't track if you've had a history of incarceration. One thing that the census does do, if you are incarcerated during the time of the count, you're counted from incarceration, the place of incarceration. And so we do know at a particular point in time the percentage of the population that is incarcerated or was incarcerated. And that itself, the ACLU, NAACP in Connecticut sees it as a civil rights violation. And because that's how the voting districts in Connecticut are drawn. So exactly, and where money goes for the communities. I brought this up at a US Census conversation with the federal government, and they said, that's up to your state. If they want to make sure that people are counted where they came from and not where they are currently incarcerated for your voter rights, the state can change that. Where there's a will, there's a way. So thank you for bringing that very important topic up.
That's totally true. And just as far as whether we have a count of the people who are eligible to vote and are not voting, it's a little complicated, but we do release, as the Secretary of the State's office releases a list to local registrars periodically of formerly incarcerated people who are now eligible to vote. So there are numbers out there. It's doable. It's just not something we've tracked yet.
And you can be incarcerated in Connecticut and be able to vote. And yes, and so if you're waiting for a bail, if you're waiting for a court date and you're still being held, you're still incarcerated. And you could be there for weeks, you could be there for months, and you are supposed to be given access to exercise your voter rights. Is it happening? No. And so there are groups of people fighting to make sure that people have access to their vote when they're incarcerated. And there have been numerous excuses saying we don't have the staffing capacity, it's a logistical nightmare, but at the end of the day, their civil rights, their voting rights, their citizenship rights are being violated. So that is happening here in Connecticut. So that's another area to support.
So I want to just make note of the time. We are running on time so far. So I want to take a couple more questions from the audience. It looks like we've got a few people that have some questions. So I apologize, but I saw his hand first. So I'm going to go with,
Yeah, is there, in the Census Bureau, are they gonna have a differentiate between Black Americans and Black immigrants? Because this has been an ongoing conversation in the Census Bureau, and there's a movement called American Descendants of Slavery, which is basically drawing that line, differentiating Black Americans from Black immigrant population when it comes to the Census Bureau and other funds and stuff of that nature. So is that going to be discussed and talked about?
for this census, unfortunately, no, there's not a differentiation in the questions. They're sticking to the same question as far as dividing people by race and ethnicity.
That might be a little bit problematic. How is it a way that can be addressed for data purposes and stuff of that nature? Because a lot of people are concerned that certain funds are not being allocated to certain communities and stuff, so forth.
My best suggestion is to coordinate native language speaking with the selection of being African American. I think that in the data that we're collecting right now, I think that would make the most sense as far as how to get a closer number on who immigrated here versus who was brought here by slavery. That's my best guess.
Okay. Because the conversation is going because of HR 40, a lot of other bills and rights that are in motion at this time frame. So that's the reason why I'm posing that question.
And I would say this, the data that we collect from the census the census itself does not dictate the use of resources. So the agencies that serve the community are the ones that dictate the use of resources. And so adding the citizenship question doesn't necessarily mean African Americans would be able to make sure those who are born in the US get more resources. The due resources to make up for the hundreds of years of slavery and the injustice that happened to African American community members. What the data does is twofold. Agencies, how they decide to use the funds that they get from the federal government and how much we will get from the federal government. And two, from community being able to push and make sure that accountability is there. So the census is the first phase. The second phase is to make sure that we are vigilant, and we also have research that says, you know, in our school districts, it's now majority Black and Latino, and X percentage of those funds from the federal government need to go to serve where Black and Latino students are. And we know in Connecticut, there's inequity in funding in the schools where Black and Latino students are. So the census gives us that amount of power. I feel that the citizenship question and the equity in funding for African Americans in the United States, it is to distract, to allow for that fearful question to come into place and to divide and conquer.
Can I sidebar? How is it fearful when the dismantle of the 1866 Civil Rights Act is being dismantled in the Allen Byron case? And everybody was going for DACA, but not worrying about the dismantle where people cannot do process and set up contracts and stuff of that nature, if you're not aware about that. So there's a lot of things to be concerned about.
Actually,
to say that, to backburner that is kind of really disrespectful.
Actually, I did not dismiss that.
Okay.
Most of the people who are fighting for, on behalf of civil rights, are also fighting for immigrant rights. The very first bail bond, nonprofit bail bond, if you are put in incarceration before even proven guilty, here in Connecticut, the same people that said, we will pay for your bail for free, not high interest. We'll make sure that you haven't even had a trial yet. We're going to make sure you get back home to your community as soon as possible. Highly impacting Black community members, African American community members. They are the same people, also the first in this country to pay for the bail of undocumented immigrants being criminalized as well, just because they don't have papers. The people in this community in Connecticut have a long history of looking at human rights, regardless of who you love, where you were born, and what language you speak at home. And I'm proud to have been raised in Connecticut. My aunt, African American, married a Guatemalan, black Guatemalan, and brought my grandmother in 1960s, black Guatemalan, and then my family came fleeing US government policy that killed thousands, hundreds of thousands of people because they were poor. Giving military weapons to Guatemalan military to kill their own people for the 1% wealthy in the US. The United Fruit Company at that time, the board member, the board president was the brother of the Attorney General, the US Attorney General. And they said, do protect our corporate dollars first. And from there, 30 years of killing Guatemalans. My dad fled Guatemala because he wrote a history book that told the truth as to how Native Americans were being killed. And someone came knocking on his door, on our home's door, and they said, if your dad doesn't leave in 6 days, next time you find him, we'll be dead. We ended up in New Haven, in the home where my grandmother was living with her son and daughter-in-law who's African American. When I say our faiths and our paths are intertwined, it is in my blood. It is in my story. And when I find that government tries to split communities, when they split us, it hurts all of us. And I appreciate your concern.
Because based on rights that were given to certain groups based on the atrocities that happened to them. Not everybody experienced the same atrocities on American soil, which I do respect what other people gone through, but the atrocities that black people went through on American soil is way different and still going on to this day. So due to the fact of militarization, list of so forth. So like when that whole dismantling of the 1866 bill, the only people that were there were the ADOS community, which were black folks, where everybody came out for the DACA, which was, there's nothing, I have nothing against it, but the thing is, nobody's not supporting of things that is concerning us. And that's what I see sometimes, honestly.
And I hear you, and I'm sorry that you feel that others don't have your back, because I am affected by DACA. People see me and they think I'm black. People see me and they might even think I'm from some other country and not from here. And the system hurts. It's built on white supremacy. Everyone who's not white, we all bleed the same. Systems of oppression hurt us all the same. And the white supremacy systems will only continue to thrive as long as we fight against each other. And I hear your pain, and
It's about pain, it's about data, about what was taken from and stolen from us economically. So when you say these things, it's not about pain, it's about data that Darity has, that could be evident, that has already been proven.
And
So
how
it's
the
not
data
about
is
pain.
used.
So it's not about pain, it's actual facts of what's been proven.
And those
like-
actual facts show Native Americans were massacred. Native American land was stolen. Native Americans were also enslaved, and they were also killed on purpose. And then we had Africans coming from Africa.
I apologize,
Oh,
but
sorry.
we've been talking about one particular question for a little bit, and I do want to let some other people get some questions in before we have to end. So I hope that you two, and also,
Thank you.
can
I'd love to
continue
talk
the
to you more
conversation.
after.
And also, I just want to offer to you, in my school studies, what I'm doing is public administration, and I work with someone, one of the professors in my school is doing a lot of research on reparations and how that would work and how you could possibly count who would receive reparations.
If he wants to come talk, I already given the website and everything he needs to know.
I think he's on the website.
we'll talk later about that.
Okay. So I know we had a question over here.
My apologies.
This is just an observation, maybe the other side of what we're talking about. I knew very little about my father's family for a lot of reasons. He was orphaned young, yada, yada, yada. But I was able to trace back, using the census, to 1850 to find my father's descendants. And that was pretty remarkable. So I guess I just wanted to share that story. So even those who are, disconnected, miscounted and everything, there's another interesting aspect of the census that could be helpful for people.
Absolutely, yeah. The genealogy aspect of it is huge. You can see I have white skin, so I came here, my family came here, we were among the pilgrims that came and enslaved the indigenous, which is also in my family, by the way. So I was both enslaving and enslaved in my history. But the thing is that you can discover so much. I mean, you talk about this DNA stuff, you can get your DNA tested, but just through the census, what's already out there, it's amazing. I mean, the public information is not released for several decades to protect the people who are alive, basically. But the people in your family ancestry who've passed away years and years ago, you can trace that back. It's amazing information, yeah. I think we can take one more question.
I was hoping to open up the conversation for a discussion around homelessness. I'm working on a campaign to help end homelessness in the state, so I was curious about your perspective on the issue of homelessness as it pertains to engagement with the census, or some of the barriers that you see that people who are homeless may face in taking the census.
Well, the fear of being counted if you're doubling up in someone's home, that's a definite barrier, as well as there are efforts in the state to assure that shelters are also helping and supporting and completing the census count. So it's more of people who are actually not even in shelters. A lot of the young families are doubling up. We're finding more and more young families facing homelessness or transient living. And so we need to partner with the schools. The public schools have to be a partner in this. And so for those of you with children in schools, for those of you who are part of schools, making sure that schools are a key delivery of messages to these families and the importance of being counted.
Also, just as far as sort of what the federal government is doing about counting homeless people, I have not heard of any particular efforts around the idea of doubling up, which is concerning, but I do know that they are working with the local communities, which is why these complete count committees are so important, to identify where are people that are homeless physically located, and they will be devoting some time this spring to bringing paid workers out to those locations to try to count the people that are not doubling up. And then I guess I just sort of want to, I've kept you a little longer than I was supposed to, so I guess I just sort of want to wrap this up by addressing what you as civic ambassadors can do to help reach the undercounted groups. First of all, like I said, email your mayor, volunteer to be a part of your own complete count committee. If your town, this is true, as Caprice mentioned, urban areas are more undercounted than suburban areas. So if your community is not so undercounted, maybe volunteer for a community next door. Those numbers, the statistics about which communities are undercounted, are all on the US Census website. There's so much data there, which it brings me to my second point about what you can do, and that's do your homework to identify what are the hard-to-reach communities in your area. I come from East Hartford. I used the census website to identify the languages that are spoken in my community. There's a lot of information like that that you can do. You can break it down by neighborhood. Where are the neighborhoods that are undercounted? So do your homework and strategize. I'm going to go back to one of the key points that Caprice mentioned. Strategize with your committee about how to reach out to the communities that are undercounted, because if you're not a part of that community, the best thing you can do is identify people that are part of that community and try and convince them to carry your message.
To be a part of it, if they are doubling up, or if they are doubling up, or if they are not on a lease, or anything like that, or they are an immigrant, or however, and they're scared to do it, or whatever. How do I assure them that it's not going to cause them to be evicted? How do I assure them that it's not going to cause them, you know what I'm saying? You guys are saying
tricky.
It doesn't, but I don't want to give anybody some kind of legal advice, almost say, yeah, no, you can do it, and then they do it, and then somehow, somewhere they lose their stuff because of it.
That's
I want to be able to ensure.
And so there are a few things to take note on the logistical side of things. The Census Bureau, I'm part of the local complete count as well in the Greater New Haven County. The Census Bureau staffers come, so if you're part of that, you'll get some of this type of information, as well as being able to ask directly Census Bureau staff. So I did ask one of those questions, and they stated that the way the census is working this year, which causes another issue around equity and access, you have to complete it online, and not everyone has tech, not everyone has internet access. And before you complete it online, you're going to get a card. On the mailing card will be a code. That code is specific just for your address, so that each household is supposed to get a card with a code. If you're doubling up, you're not going to get a card for your household. And the person that you're staying with may not want to consider you as part of their household. So there is going to be a 1-800 number accessible if you never got a card. If you never got that code in that card, you can just call the 1-800 number and complete your census by the phone. And that phone number is also going to be available for various languages. So in our local count community, we're going to tell people, you know what, if you're doubling up, call that number. Complete the count that way. The other piece is the Census Bureau, if you go online, there's flyers that will state the laws, existing laws in the United States that protect the utilization of that data. Other agencies they're not allowed to get individualized data. We all see the aggregate data, so that no one is supposed to be able to see so-and-so lives in such and such house, this age, number of children. It's all aggregate.
There, and to your your question about the security of it, everyone in the Census Bureau takes a pledge to protect the individual information.
Yes.
And the penalties for releasing any individual information are both financially and time-wise, as far as, yes, you'll go to jail, significant enough that it makes me personally feel secure that for the most part, nobody's gonna risk releasing my individual data. But yeah, the Census Bureau takes very seriously its confidentiality issues. Like I said earlier, as far as they don't release data until people have reasonably, I hate to use it, cycled out of their life expectancy. So I guess that's what I would tell them. And I mean, honestly, it's all in the end based on trust, which is why it's so important that the message comes from you and not me.
Okay, so we run out of time. But please join me in thanking both Tina and Caprice for a wonderful panel. Thank you. And Caprice, you said the website where they can get more information. Can you repeat that, the link again?
The U.S. Census, so there is a U.S. Census website. I could look that up really quick. And they have tons of flyers and information broken down by community, quote unquote, hard to count community, that can be very helpful. So I'll tell you in a second unless you know that off the top of your head.
I believe it's census.gov, but I'll let her double check. What I will also say is,
Yep.
Is that it? Census.gov?
2020 census.gov.
2020. What I will also say is that the census is recruiting workers. We sort of touched on this a little bit. If you know people that might be looking for temporary jobs, have them go to the census website, have them apply. And then, like I said, encourage people, try and identify people within the hard to count communities that will also apply, because you don't want some old white lady showing up on your doorstep, knocking there and saying, "Hi, I'm here from the government," you know? I mean, that's not what you want, so.
So is there gonna be some kind of hiring of people with criminal records? Because in those communities you're talking about, most of those people in those households, because I've done organizing.
That's a good question.
People in that household would have a criminal record.
I asked, and I was told they're encouraging everyone to apply. And then I was told it depends exactly what shows up in the background check. But they did not say that they are not eligible for jobs, but we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Okay, so again, let's thank them both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Connecticut Civic Ambassadors are engaged in a great variety of civic and community projects and activities, all contributing to making our communities and our democracy stronger. During the PowerPoint slideshow this morning, you may have noticed some of the slides had highlighted some of the work of the civic ambassadors that are working all over the state to improve our communities. But to learn more about 3 of our finest civic ambassadors, I want to introduce our second panel, Connecticut Civic Ambassadors in Action. To introduce the panelists, please welcome the panel moderator, himself a Connecticut Civic Ambassador, Mr. Richard Frieder. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you, Val, and good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all here. So, as Val said, this panel is about civic ambassadors in action. There are many great examples across the state of civic ambassadors doing great things. We have a few terrific examples, people representing great work being done up here on the stage today. Probably a number of you could have been up here, so maybe next year. But in the meantime, we do have these 3 wonderful stories that we're going to share with you. So my job is to introduce them and to manage things a little bit, and to bring us in on time or close to it. And Val has threatened me to be on time. And Val has a side that many of you don't see. No, but what we're going to do is we're going to show brief video clips describing the work of each of our guests here on the panel, and then talk with them. And we'll just do that consecutively. And I'm going to ask you to hold your questions to the end, just so that we can make sure to get all of them in first, and then we'll get to your questions. After each video, I'm going to ask them a couple of quick questions, and then we'll move on to the next panelist. So we will get started. So first, let me introduce our guests. On my left, your right, is Jackie McKinney. Jackie is a member of the Hartford Vote to Coalition. She has been very active in different community and cultural organizations in Greater Hartford. for many years, including Connecticut Landmarks, where she worked for a number of years. And she's also very active in ANA, which is the Asylum Hill Neighborhood Association. It's the NRZ, the Neighborhood Revitalization Zone for the Asylum Hill neighborhood. I believe you are the chair right now, is that right? Yes. Okay, great. I'm going to introduce everybody first. So please welcome Jackie. To my immediate right is our friend Elder Don Padgett. He is the founder and executive director of Hartford Community Leaders Development Corporation, a 501c3 nonprofit that implements a broad range of strategies to promote community health and development, including community-driven efforts to prevent violence, classes on how to find jobs, housing assistance, alcohol and substance abuse referrals, and basic financial literacy. He is also well known as an ordained elder and pastor, community activist, business owner, and radio and television personality. He is currently pastor of True Vine Church of Christ, Inc., Walk in the Light Deliverance Church in Hartford, and also business CEO of Executive Sound Entertainment, LLC. You are a busy guy. Elder Don and I have known each other for a long time, so I knew about most of this, but even I'm learning something here. He hosts a weekly current affairs, public access, and internet radio show called Hartford Community Leaders Talk, which airs on Hartford Public Access TV5 and East Hartford Public Access, as well as some radio stations. His show covers such topics as conflict resolution on contentious community issues, social justice, business and economic development, and community news and events. So please welcome Elder Don Padgett. And last but certainly not least, to my far right, is Philip Kent. He is an attorney with the New Haven law firm of Sussman, Duffy, and Siegeloff, and has been an activist and advocate for civil rights as well as community volunteer and leader. He is currently engaged with the Connecticut Collaborative on Poverty, Criminal Justice, and Race, and Congregations Organized for a New Connecticut, also known as Connect, which is spearheading its Clean Slate campaign. Mr. Kent also volunteers with the PEA? Is it? PEA, I'm sorry. The PEA Project, a community garden he co-chaired for 5 years that donates half of its produce to local soup kitchens. So please welcome Philip. So again, we're thrilled to have this terrific panel, and as I said before, we're going to start with the brief videos of each of their work, and then we'll talk a little. So.
Hartford Community Leaders started in the year of 2014, bringing residents together in the city of Hartford to work on solutions that affects our community, such as violence, health, and education. We work with individuals, we work with faith-based organizations, service organizations, businesses, towards a better, greater Hartford community on issues that affects our lives on a daily basis. In 2014, we started the No More Fear Forum, bringing faith leaders together, organizations together, businesses together to talk about some of the solutions that's needed in the community. We talked about jobs, housing, mental health screening, substance abuse. We did surveys in the community, and we took those surveys, and what we found out, we needed to have more employment training, employment planning, the interview process, resume making. And so this is what we started to do in 2014 to set up a job and housing workshop in the community. And we had over 350 individual students and men and women in the community come out, and they were able to get jobs and talk with community organizations to get assistance and help. We've met with these residents, planned with the residents, and basically come up with solutions to some of the problems that we've encounters such as jobs, housing, and mental health screening. Work with homelessness. We work with different age groups such as children, students, middle school students, and high school students, and also college students to address some of the needs in the community, such as preparing for high school, preparing for a college, and just empowering the individuals to become better, that they can become good citizens and have a vibrant career. I'm proud to be a Civic Ambassador. The reason why I wanted to join the Civic Ambassadors is because it's a way to communicate with the greater Hartford and the surrounding areas, to talk about what they've done in different cities that can help us in our city, and to work with those individuals on change. We need each other for change. We need each other to work together on a vibrant community, economic development in our community, to have leaders in our community. And so that's the reason why I'm a Civic Ambassador. It is important for individuals and people to get engaged because change will happen. And the only way we can do that is work together with them to change those lives. And that's why we're here, to encourage one another, to motivate one another, to inspire one another, to be the best that we can be.
So Elder Don, let's get started by, well, first, is there anything in particular you want to add to the video before I ask you a couple of questions?
I just want to thank everyone for allowing me to be here, an opportunity to represent for our greater Hartford community. And I think we've covered a lot in that video.
Okay, so there's nothing left to say, right?
No.
Can you say just a few words about how Hartford community leaders got started?
Yes, we got started as a community group. We came in together with residents in the greater Hartford area and to come together to talk about some of the needs that we're facing in our community, such as jobs, housing, mental health screening. All of these things affect our community in so many ways. It is a health crisis in our community. When you talk about the homicides that are happening, yearly, the vigils that we've attended, the funerals that we've attended. Matter of fact, on yesterday, I funeralized a 22-year-old young man who hasn't even started his life. That was just taken away. He was homeless. Homelessness in our communities. Let's talk about homelessness with the veterans in our community. There are so many things that impact our communities, and this is why we wanted to come together with residents to come to work, not just to have a meeting, not just for the numbers, but just to come and provide solutions to some of the problems that we've been facing in our communities. And I'm telling you, by working in these circles with the different residents and working with them and planning with them, and we have people that care in our communities, that care about what happens in our community. And it touches my heart when I talk about some of the things that I've gone through in our community and seen, and what we need to do is we need to come together as a people. We have lost the love for each other in our communities. There are so many older folks that have volunteered numerous of hours down through the years, but our young people are disengaged. And so I was able to, at that memorial, talk with over 50 young men, between young men and women, and encourage them to get involved in the community. That relationship, develop a relationship with those young men and women for economic development, for education, to strive to be the best that they can be. in our communities and to get involved with each other in relationship.
Great, thank you. Can you talk a little about what you're most proud of? As I mentioned, you and I have worked together quite a bit. I'm familiar with some of the activities of Hartford Community Leaders, but you've done a lot over the years.
Yes.
What are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of is by serving. I'm a servant, and my job is to be able to help my community to, for economic development, to see, when I hear stories of a homeless man, and we've gone out to the homeless shelters, we've talked to those individuals, we've held classes for those individuals, and when I can go out in the community and they see me and they say, Elder Don, I appreciate you and your organization for coming out and speaking with me. Now I have an apartment. Now I have a job. Now I'm raising a family and I'm a good citizen. Those type of stories that we hear of, encouraging stories, makes me want to do even more in our community.
Great, thank you. And yes, you've accomplished a lot, but as we all know, the challenges are enormous, and they've been decades or even centuries in the making, so there's no quick answers. What worries you the most as you think about the coming months and years with Hartford Community Leaders? What concerns or worries you the most, other than money? Because we know that's across, everybody has that concern and worry.
My concern is that our young men and women will become disengaged into the community, understanding of their culture. And that's one of my concerns, is that we have to be able to sit down with young people and to evolve them as leaders in our community. We have some smart young men and women in our communities, but they're disconnected. They're disconnected. And so what we need to do as community folks and residents, we need to bring those individuals together, have them volunteer for some of the services that we do in our community. Have them work on your initiatives. And when they see other young people working on initiatives in our community, volunteering, volunteering for jobs and things like that, they can become engaged and become better and become civic ambassadors in our community. And I think that's one of my main concerns. The next main concern is that we have so much, a lot of main concerns, and I have a list of a lot of main concerns here on it. But we want to make sure that our community is a vibrant community and that we're not disconnected from the community and we're not left behind.
Great, thank you so much. So you may have questions for Elder Don, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to ask you to make a mental note or jot them down, and when we finish with all three of our panelists, we're going to open it up for questions and conversation. But right now, we're going to move on to our next panelist in the video, and Hartford Votes, Jackie. Okay. Well, the Hartford Votes Vote to Coalition is a coalition of about a dozen organizations and agencies that are committed to increasing voter engagement in Hartford. And we make a distinction between voter engagement and voter turnout. Voter turnout is part of voter engagement, but voter engagement is a bigger thing.
We don't focus on any one party or whatever. It's just get out the vote.
The coalition was established around 2003. Linda Bear and I first established it. And at first it was 2 or 3 organizations working together, and things evolved, and a few more organizations joined, and after a few years we gave it a name.
Well, our biggest event are the candidate forums.
So now we will begin with the candidates, and they're each going to stand in the middle of this floor here in front of where they're standing and give you a 1-minute introduction about why they're running and what's their most important issue.
Giving candidates an opportunity to meet their constituents or the potential constituents, I think is very valuable.
Each year, elections are different. This year, the entire city council, as well as the mayor and other offices like treasurer, are all up for election. So we may tend to do more events this year. Last year, a lot of state offices were up for election, so we did quite a few. Then there will be years where there's only Board of Ed, and we might only do a couple of events. So.
I'd like to know what each of the mayoral candidates proposes, because the one in seat right now is pushing upon the unions these high deductible plans, and likewise in many companies.
Okay.
I'd like to know what each person thinks about that.
Periodically, we do get involved in education. You know, it's like, what does the city council do? You know, what does the mayor do? What does the treasurer do? So we try and do some of that too.
This year, for the first time at our candidate forums, we'll be using this note sheet that we'll hand out to all the participants. And this is a sheet on which participants can keep notes about candidates, about the issues that are important to each participant, and notes about what candidates had to say about those issues.
A civic ambassador is my opportunity to sort of give back to my community. You know, we live in the community, and it's important to be a part of the decision making to help the community have input in different civic projects.
Well, I think the Civic Ambassador program is really important and valuable because it recognizes the contributions that people who are civically engaged make. And generally these contributions go unnoticed. So by being a civic ambassador and having opportunities to interact with other civic ambassadors, I learn about all kinds of things that are going on around the state that I might not have known of, and I get a chance to tell others about what we're doing, and that has the effect of growing the overall effort. So I think there's real value to the Civic Ambassadors program. Jackie, you and I have worked together now on the Hartford Votes Coalition for, I don't know, it's got to be 10 anyway, I don't know. But what are you most proud of when you think back over what the Hartford Vote to Coalition has done over all these years?
I would say education. You certainly go and vote without being educated about who you're voting for or what that person does. But we've really focused every year on doing a little bit of education for people, young people coming in, to help them understand why they're voting. We worked not too long ago with our friend Linda, may she rest in peace. We worked with a group of young people between 18 and 20, and it happened to be the year the Board of Education candidates were up. And they learned about what the board did, why the board's important. Many of them had children, and so how that personally tied to them. And then they got to create their own program. So those are the kinds of things, is you never know who you're going to touch. You may have 100 people go through, and one may you connect with one person who could significantly impact their community as they go forward.
Great, thanks. And what's coming down the pike in the not too distant future for the coalition?
Well, the 2020 election. I also happen to volunteer on election day, and everybody's getting nervous about 2020. It's amazing. Even the poll people going, oh, do I really want to work that day? So what to do with the 2020 election? And again, education. What do we focus on that would maybe give people education that could entice them to come to vote? I think we certainly won't probably get the presidential candidates here to speak to our folks, but what can we do that would ensure that more people would come to the polls?
Great, thanks. And a challenge, I think it was mentioned earlier, but we're all very, very familiar with it, is how to increase voter engagement and voter turnout. There's really across the country, there is a problem in low voter turnout. Tends to be a more serious problem, a greater problem in urban areas, but certainly across the country, it's an issue. What are your thoughts on what has the Hartford Vote to Coalition done on, to try to engage people and get them to come out and vote?
I think the education is probably the little times that we've stopped and educated people. Why are you doing this? What do these people do who you're voting for? I think probably that has the longest lasting effect on the community.
Right, and if I can add, since you and I are partners on the work of the coalition, we learned something very interesting and important several years ago when we operate, we're almost entirely volunteer and operate on almost no money. In fact, when we have events, we're not sure where the money is going to come from to buy bags of chips. But about 5 years ago, we did succeed in getting a grant. It was federal money through the state to do a Latino voter engagement project. And we learned something really important, and that project happened to target the Latino community, but it could have been anybody. What we learned is true for anybody. And that is that a way to get more people to vote is, drum roll, are you ready? Talk to them. Eureka, what a shock. But seriously, our project was based on projects that had been done in Detroit and somewhere else out west, was it Arizona? I think it was Arizona, yeah. So we weren't breaking brand new ground, but we learned the same thing they learned, but it was valuable to learn it, which is if you go out before elections and talk to people, which we did because we had some funding, we were able to go door to door, do some canvassing, totally nonpartisan, and just talk with people about voting and make sure they were registered and they knew where to vote and when, that there was about a 5% increase in voter turnout in the areas where we went out and talked to people. And that by itself is not a huge deal, 5%, although, you know, it's good. But if you could do that year after year, you could really have a big impact. So I know one of our goals in the coalition is to, I said before, I asked before about what do you want other than money. Well, now I'm going to talk about the coalition. We'd like to get money so that we could do more of that work and have more of an impact on voter turnout. So, Jackie, anything else you want to add right now?
Oh, just changing the subject. I was thinking about my volunteering, one of the more interesting things that I volunteered is on the I-84 project. The viaduct of I-84 has gotten old and it will fall down if we don't do something with it. And that's been a real education. It doesn't sound well. You're just talking about concrete and steel, but the impact a piece of highway can have on so many hundreds of thousands of people's lives, it really is impressive. So that was been one of my most favorite.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Okay, we'll pass this down to Phil since he's going to be next. So thank you, Jackie. And again, jot down or make a mental note of your questions. We're going to get to them. And yes, thanks, Jackie. And now we will watch our third video and then talk with Phil.
People would say, leave your feelings at home. That's very difficult to do sometimes. because what this means to me is everything, everything.
1 in 3 Connecticut residents have some type of criminal record. Any record, no matter how old or minor, can stand in the way of jobs, housing, education, and more. For people like Roxburgh, the economic and emotional trauma can follow you for decades.
My record dates back to 1987. I was arrested, and I was a substance abuser. There was no counselor, it was just me.
In the decades after her release, Roxburgh got clean and tried to rebuild her life. She got her undergraduate degree in human services and tried to start her career. But at every turn, her record stood in her way.
I went looking for jobs, and every door that could possibly close was slammed in my face. When I began to do the social work, I learned that I couldn't get licensed. There is a waiver process, but it's designed to deter the employer, because they're saying to the employer, this is who you're dealing with. Do you really want to deal with them? In order for me to measure up to what people who have my degree and credentials, in order for me to measure up financially, I have to work 2 full-time jobs.
Roxburgh started Connecticut's expedited expungement process that's supposed to let her have the career she's worked so hard to start. But she's been waiting 6 months.
Now, my application sits, as of yesterday, waiting for someone to take it. They've had my application since around the end of January, completed successful, but no one's said anything.
A new bill introduced in Connecticut called the Clean Slate Act would make expungement for people like Roxburgh automatic after they remain crime-free for a set period of time. Then they can move on with their lives and provide for their families.
What clean slate means to me, it means the world to me, because then I can celebrate and say, I'm free.
Roxburgh has learned from her past. It's time Connecticut does too. Go to cleanslatecampaign.org to learn more.
Great, thank you. Phil, would you like to add anything to the video? Maybe kind of a little more context? And yeah.
Tammy King is one of the fiercest advocates that I have had the pleasure to work with, and I can report to you at long last, if she were here, she would hold up her pardon certificate and tell you that she finally has received her pardon. So, but she is not done fighting for clean slate, because she knows that it's more than just about her and her ability to move on with her life. She's gone through the process. She sees the problems with the existing pardon process and the struggles that she had to go through to be able to get that clean slate or that expungement for herself. And our bill is going to change that process and make it a lot smoother and better for thousands of people if it gets passed.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Yeah, hold on to those questions, we're almost there. Phil, tell us just a little about how did you get involved in this? How did that get started?
Well,
the reason I ask, and I asked the question of other panelists too, is that we're all civic ambassadors, and part of what we're doing here today is showing great examples of the great work that civic ambassadors are doing. So, so I think people will be interested to know your story and how you got involved. Yeah.
So I come from, I've been doing this work in different ways for about 20 years, maybe a little bit more. I was a Teach for America teacher in the 90s in New York City in the 1996 Corps. I did my 2 years of teaching, which you do at TFA, and I decided I wanted to make a bigger impact. So in my wisdom, I decided I'd go to law school and had this big dream of having impact. And of course, I became a private lawyer for largely rich people. As a way to fulfill the dream that I went to school for, I started doing all kinds of public service projects on the side of that. Fast forward many years, around 2016, I got involved in a campaign with Connect. And just tell you a little bit about Connect, it is Congregations Organized for a New Connecticut. Started long before I got there, around 2011, as a faith-based, multi-faith, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Sikh organizations. There's about 28 organizations that are part of Connect, multiracial, multi-ethnic. and all about, grassroots organizing, listening to people's personal stories, finding what their issues are, and then coalescing around, as Elder Don said, around solutions for those issues, whether that be legislative or otherwise. I got involved in a campaign that was aimed at a very violent bar and restaurant in my town of Hamden. We did not hesitate to file a petition with the state of Connecticut and take their liquor license away and shut this place down, which made that neighborhood a much better place. A few years later, I became co-chair of this criminal justice team of Connect, and we started doing the same thing, listening to stories, figuring out what we're going to do. We were looking at the bail issue. We were looking at pretrial voting rights issues. We were, and then we finally settled on this concept of taking a look at people's criminal records and the effect that it has on them.
Great, thank you, thanks. And what's coming up in the next year or so for Connect and the Clean Slate campaign?
So we've been doing this for probably about a year and a half. We went through the entire legislative session in the 2019 session that just ended last June. We came very, very close to getting the legislation passed, but we came up against the wall. At the end of that legislative session, you either get through or you don't, right? And then you gotta, if you don't, you come back and you do it again. So right now, we've continued to have meetings with our champion legislators, Senator Winfield and State Representative Staffstrom, who are the two co-chairs for the Judiciary Committee with the legislature. They are 100% behind this bill, and we are now told that the governor is going to be putting forth a clean slate bill as well, and that it'll be one of his priorities in this upcoming legislative session.
Great, thank you. Well, I could go on and on asking questions, but we've made sure to leave a significant amount of time for your questions and have some conversation. Somebody was running around with a microphone earlier. Okay, so if you'd like to ask a question, you can go to either microphone, is that right? There's one over here and one over here. And let's get going. So let's start here, and then we'll alternate. Please, go ahead.
Begin by saying thank you to all of you and the hard work that you're doing. My question was, with the conversations you've had, Elder Don, is that your name? Yeah. How did you find the receptiveness once you came up with these ideas with the residents from folks that could implement some of the things that you were hoping to do? What was the responsiveness of city council members, of state representatives, and things of that nature? Because I often find like things bubble up, but they also can fizzle out if there's no responsiveness from government to implement some of the things that you would hope for.
One of the things that I would like to say is that in 2014 when we started and we planned with the residents of Hartford and the greater Hartford area, and we had city council members come in to assist us with the planning. And also we had organizations that came together to work for the change, and businesses came together. And one of the good things about it, we were able to sit down and they provided laptops for us, over 20 laptops for us, and we sat with residents and created resumes for these individuals, gave them information on how to go about job searches, how to search the websites for jobs, and do referrals, and how to dress for success. We even had a segment in the Job and Housing Workshop where we had individuals that didn't know how to tie ties. And you just imagine a lot of individuals don't know how to tie a tie, men and women. And so those things, but the residents came together, and we had businesses that supported. When you talk about doing an event and you talk about thousands of dollars doing an event, we had $0 doing an event. It was all community. We had businesses come in providing food. I mean, it was, you talk about the food back there, that's how much food we had, you know, for individual pizza, you know, you name it. And it wasn't about just the food, but it was about educating those individuals so that they can take back to their community and to get help for themselves.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I also noticed that you guys wanted to increase like voting and stuff of that nature. How do you feel about people that are voting down ballot versus like they're still actively engaged, but they're not liking the candidates or not liking the policies that these candidates are coming with? What's your take on that? Because you can still actively engage, but vote down the ballot if they don't like what's being represented. So can you please clarify that and explain that? I would like to hear that.
Can you define what down ballot means? I mean,
Voting down ballot means that you will put something in the place of that candidate, or you will leave it blank or mark it blank, saying that this candidate did not support the values or did not represent me, did not have the policies or anything that represent me. So what is your take on that? No, you can vote down ballot. I've done it.
You can.
So you never did it.
I don't know. Do you have an opinion on that? I think it's your freedom. Now that I say I don't have an opinion, certainly people should have the freedom to vote however they want, even down ballot. I suspect, and this is only because I work at the polls, so there's nothing scientific about that we don't do a lot of that in Hartford.
Well, you might want to, because if the candidates are not.
I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Yeah.
I'm just saying, if the candidates are not representing the values of the citizens and the constituents of the community, why on earth would you even co-sign them?
They're not, they're educated. They host forums.
Yeah.
So why didn't how come down ballot was not even an option?
No, it is an option.
But do you educate the people about down balloting and stuff of that nature?
Probably.
Well, we haven't, but we certainly could in the future. Yeah, we're entirely, the Hartford Voter Coalition is entirely about education. We're nonpartisan, and it's all about increasing voter engagement. So we occasionally do educational programs in addition to candidate forums. So that could be the topic for an educational program.
When you also say nonpartisan, you also said that you specifically did something for the Latino community and did a project. What about those that are saying about a black agenda? Saying that, what are you doing specifically for black folks that went through descendants of slavery and stuff of that nature? And that is, how come you're not educating the black constituents about that and their rights about that?
Go ahead.
Or have you? I'm not familiar with you guys, or if God forbid, if no disrespect.
No, I know. But one of the things is our focus has always been narrow, mainly because of money, and we don't have staff. And so when you start, we just went through November. Now it's time to get ready for next November. We hardly have money for potato chips. So what we tend to do is focus very narrowly on what we're going to do, because we really don't have the capacity to do anything bigger, which would be the kind of education items that you're talking about. We just don't have the capacity to do that.
Well, a lot of the stuff I got off of YouTube and actually went to school and other things of that nature. So like, I'm kind of concerned, like, what is the message, or how are you misguiding somebody in their voting process?
Well, no, I'm going to add a little to what Jackie said, and then we have to move on because we have a number of people. But our educational programs are intended for everybody. Doesn't matter who you are or what color your skin is or how much money you have. We have a quite diverse group that does the planning. We listen to the community as much as we can to find out what people are thinking about and talking about and want to find out more about. And we promote very heavily throughout Hartford. So our activities really are not directed to this part of the population or that. The Latino Voter Education Project, frankly, was a grant opportunity. And that's the reason that we focused on the Latino community. That I can't think of anything else that we've done that's been focused on one segment of the community, so.
Okay, okay. When you said that, it channels and looks differently for other people. That's all.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
Well, no, that's okay. Well, we're here to talk and you know, hear ideas, and if there are some misperceptions about what we're doing, we're glad to discuss it. So thank you. We're going to move on to our next question over here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tracy Bernardi, and one of the things that I like to tell people, I don't like that this is in my history, but I served a 30-year sentence. I served 23 years off of it, and I'm out here with you right now. My point is, when you go in, you do eventually come out, and the clean slate is a beautiful thing, but the clean slate perpetuates the idea that there should be carve-outs, and in our country and in our state and everywhere else, double jeopardy is illegal for the court systems to do, but it's certainly legal for society to alienate formerly incarcerated people, and I appreciate what you guys are doing with the clean slate. However, as many people as clean slate might help, clean slate could help so many more, and the idea that it's separated and it's separated between violent and non-violent offenders is really unfair, because if the judge thought that I should be in jail for life, I would be in jail for life. And the fact that I'm home, I should be allowed to have a future, and to exclude felons from the clean slate bill it perpetuates the idea that there should be some division between humanity, and I personally don't think there is. I know that there's supporters that some of the main supporters on this are for. It started out felons and non-felons, and then it went down to just misdemeanors.
Not in Connecticut.
So what is it in Connecticut?
Yeah, so I very much appreciate your perspective, and I can tell you there's a lot of internal tension in our group about, when we're proposing language to the legislature, right, what should that say and what should it include? Because our ideal, I think, resonates with exactly what you're saying, but we're also having to deal with what might be called clean slate 1.0, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we get
2.0, 1.0 already exists. I did that already.
Thanks. But the point is, the legislation that we're proposing right now proposes to build on the framework of the timeframes that are used by the current Board of Pardons and Paroles, which is that you be eligible for clean slate for most misdemeanors 3 years after you've served your time if you remain crime-free, and for certain felonies, 5 years after you've served your time if you remain crime-free. That doesn't mean that we don't want to do more than that, right? But we also have to deal with the political reality on the ground. What can we get passed? What can we make into law? And then when can we come back and do more than that?
I work with ACLU Smart Justice. I'm a
Right.
Smart Justice leader, and I can tell you that it's more not about, it shouldn't be about what they're going to accept. It should be what we're going to make them accept. We got to hold people accountable to their positions, to their jobs, and if we segregate and we keep people separate, then so is everybody else, and they're going to say that's okay. And so for me, I think that it's a great thing to be doing, but then you have to look at the backside of it too. Are you going to close the loopholes of, no matter what I do, no matter how many times my name has been in the paper for good things since I've come home, my crime always stays on the top. So if I get my record expunged, if I do anything like that, what can you do to circumvent? I mean, really, the root of it should be to hold a society accountable, people in society accountable for alienating people based on their record. That's a bias that should not be acceptable, and I don't know, for me, I don't want to talk forever, but...
Thank you. No, we agree with you, and we are working with folks with Smart Justice. So I'd certainly love to talk with you more and have you interface with our group and see what we can talk about. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And please, that's a good point. Everybody, I'm sure all of our panelists would love to talk further because we are going to run out of time at some point. But feel free to come up and talk with our panelists who I believe will be around for the rest of the day today, the rest of the event. 2 more questions. Okay. Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna help you guys out to answer his question. In 2010, I used to be a Hartford Voltas member
right, you
under
were.
a Better Way Foundation. And in 2010, 2011, 2013, we did specifically poor and minority voter outreach targeting the African American community in the north end of Hartford, Park area, and the west end of Hartford. So, boom, 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 boom. Got
Thank
that for
you, Louise.
And numbers that, and for the clean slate, I do have a question, because my question is, and I've worked with Senator Winfield when he was Representative Holder Winfield, and they gave me the same comment years ago: "It's just not your time." I have a manslaughter 2 charge that I received in '93. I got convicted in '95 after being in jail from '93 to '95 because my bond was high. It was self-defense. There is no self-defense clause in Connecticut except for when you're in your vehicle and you have an armed gun. You can actually shoot somebody and kill them if they try to carjack you. But if you're in your home and you're trying to defend your home, Connecticut says it's not self-defense if you can run out the other door. You got to be trapped, right? And so when you're thinking about this clean slate bill, are you considering mental health and domestic people? Because I suffer from combat PTSD and psychosomatic seizures. And prior to my crime, I had suffered from PTSD and youth trauma and abuse, and it didn't properly was addressed, which led to me not knowing how to properly handle myself when I was encountered with violence, right? I became violent myself. So I don't want to hear anymore, after being home 20 years, giving back to my society for 20 years, serving my 6-year term fully after a 10-year sentence, that I have to wait. I don't need to wait anymore. I'm done waiting. It should be clean slate regardless, because it doesn't make a difference. And listen, I get what we can pass now, we'll pass it later. And I'm telling you, I have a nonprofit lobbying company I started because of this conversation. The legislators, the politicians, since we're talking about civic engagement, does not dictate to us what they're going to do for us. The power is in the vote and the voter. We dictate to them what we want them to do for us. And therefore, for that clean slate bill, sir, can you please go back to your people and say, there are people who've been out here for 20 years and stronger saying, no more carve-outs. We want everybody included. There's been the 3 years for minimums and 5 years for felonies. That's been going on since we started having pardons. What we're looking for is people who've been out of jail longer than 10 years, regardless of their crime and their felony, get automatic expungements, especially those who've been active in community getting back. I have a provisional pardon, but if you Google my name, my crime comes up. Not my 20-year anniversary of successful reentry, not my certificate of accomplishment for 15 years of services to the General Assembly as a community advocate, organizer, and grassroots lobbyist. Not all the stuff I did for the youth and youth engagement in Hartford, New Britain, Bridgeport, New Haven, Waterbury, the colleges, none of that. What comes up is manslaughter 2 that happened in 1993. I'm 47. It happened when I was 21. So I'm saying, while we're engaging people like me, some of us have been home already. Don't keep sugarcoating the issue. It's 2019. We're going to 2020. It's time to fight fair, fight for all. That's what civic engagement is.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I would just say one thing. I would just say, come to the Capitol with us and tell your story to the legislators, because they need to hear that, right? They need to hear the passion from you, and to understand that you are not the person that you were whenever that happened, right? And that you deserve the opportunity, just like anybody else, to come back from that and to be a full citizen, being able to participate in whatever job you want, whatever house you want to live in, whatever school you want to go back to school to, whatever you want to do, right? I'm with you. And that's all I can say. But please engage with us. Come tell your story. That is civic engagement. Telling it here, I think, is important. Telling it on the day of the public hearing, also very important. Going up there with us, talking to legislators in the hallways and saying, you know what, we want you to do even more, right? And we deserve it. I think that's super important, and thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you. We are.
One more question, please keep it brief, because we have to be aware of other people who also want to ask questions.
Yeah, we're going to go over here because we said we would alternate, so.
My question was answered during the census speak about homeless people being counted when they're housed in a shelter. I would like to, my name is Pamela. I would like to say that Jackie said you never know who you're going to touch. And when I went out on break, a citizen came to me and said she recognized me from a television interview that I did. I don't think I realized I was being interviewed. She applauded me for saying that this is what homelessness looks like and that this is what hunger looks like. She applauded me for a misquote. I never said that I'm against cots in warming centers. I'm against cots in the Willie Ware Warming Center if it's going to be the only overnight warming center in the city. Because if you put cots in that small space, you're going to accommodate less people and more people are going to be outside. I am homeless. I've been homeless for 8 months. My journey began at the Willie Ware Warming Center. I am still homeless. I'm educating myself on advocacy and resources. One of the issues was a lack of income. And I'm going to say it. My retirement pension just started. I'm 62, and I'm very fortunate that I have that pension coming to me because it's going to help me move forward. I would also like to say that one of the ladies at the table had food that she didn't want, and she offered it to me, and I said, I'll take it back to the shelter. The women will be so happy. And another woman heard me say that, and she gave me her lunch. So if you don't want lunch, and you can give me a ride back to the shelter with all that food, I'd be happy to take it off your hands.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm sorry we're out of time. I know Val is going to transition us here, but I just want to thank our panelists.
Thank you.
And terrific job. And these are just great examples of what civic ambassadors are doing. And I know that you all, I mean, everybody in here is a civic ambassador. So keep up the great work. And thank you for the great questions and comments, terrific conversation. And we'll turn it back over to Val.
Thank you. Thank you so much again. Over the years, I've worked with both high school and college students and have always been inspired by and impressed with their outstanding civic leadership and engagement. Civic engagement is a transformative experience for young people, often defining their lifelong civic pursuits and commitment. So I'm very pleased to introduce our next panel, Youth Civic Engagement and Leadership, and its moderator, also a Connecticut Civic Ambassador, Ms. Sally Whipple, who will introduce the panelists. Please welcome them. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. I'm Sally Whipple. I'm the Executive Director at the Connecticut Democracy Center at Connecticut's Old State House, and this is a place where we talk a lot about history and civics because we believe that you can't understand the world without history, you can't change it without some kind of civic knowledge. And I think we've had a wonderful opportunity today to listen to people with all kinds of different knowledge, experience, and skill and see how that drives people toward making communities better for everybody, bringing different ideas to the table, different opinions to the table, and different skills to the table. At the Old State House, we believe in lifelong civic engagement, that it can start very, very young. Sometimes we call it cradle to grave civic engagement, but sometimes that doesn't sound so good. But we believe that this lifelong civic engagement takes many, many forms, and we've heard about so many of those today. It could be voting, running for office, testifying, volunteering. But as Tina said this morning, it could also be being kind to a neighbor, picking up litter, doing something to help somebody that you've met, a stranger or a neighbor. It's about community, and it's about how our communities work together. Anyone at just about any age can take civic action. Some people may climb the civic ladder, starting with being kind to a friend or a stranger, and eventually end up as an elected official. Each rung of that ladder matters. It doesn't matter where you are on those rungs. It matters that you care about your community and you take action to make it better. So today, we're going to hear from 4 young people about work that they have been doing in their communities and even outside of their communities. We're going to hear about how they have been active, engaged, and making a difference. We have a 6th grader, Riley Bard, who participated in the Connecticut's Kid Governor program at the Old State House. And we're going to talk to 2 high school students from Enfield, Jackson Liver and Zachary Zanoni. And we're going to talk to a college junior from Trinity, Caroline Munn. And they're all going to tell us very briefly about some of the things that we've been doing, and then I'm going to ask them questions, and then I would like you to ask them questions. And I like having young folks up here because they're going to speak maybe from a slightly different perspective than some of us have spoken throughout the day. And it will give us some insight into where we're all headed for the future when we talk to younger people like this, and what really is the kind of spark that will get them engaged. So we're going to begin with Riley, and we're going to start by looking at her video. Now, Riley participated in the Kid Governor program, and this is a program that we created a few years ago where students have to identify an issue in their community that concerns them. Then they have to think up a 3-point plan to solve that problem. Then they create a campaign video with their classmates to show what their solutions to the problem will be and why they would make a good leader for the children of Connecticut. And then those students run in an election, a real election. This year we had more than 6,000 5th graders registered to vote. They watch the campaign videos in the classroom, and then during grown-up election week, they vote for Connecticut's Kid Governor. And last year, the Kid Governor was Ella Briggs, and her platform was to solve the problem of LGBTQ safety in schools. And every year, the kids pick the topic that they care about, and the kids vote on that. But the topics that the students pick are so wonderful. And there are 7 students who run in the final election, and Riley was one of those last year. And the students who do not become Kid Governor become the Kid Governor's cabinet. And they spend the rest of the year working with the Kid Governor, giving her advice or him advice, and they also choose to continue working on their own platforms. So you're going to see now Riley's campaign video from last year when she was in 5th grade, and you'll see the issue that she was concerned about and what she planned to do about it.
Hello, 5th graders of Connecticut. My name is Riley, and I want to be your next Connecticut's Kid Governor. I'm going to need your help in working with my issue, which is helping kids in foster care feel better about their life at home and in school.
What is foster care, Riley?
Well, good question. Foster care is when a child is cared for or lives with people who are not their biological parents. Children who live in foster care are typically living in this situation because of neglect or abuse. This can harm the children emotionally and physically.
How does this affect kids in Connecticut, Riley?
Shockingly well, this year, 4,000 kids in Connecticut are affected by the foster care system on any given day. Think about it. That's more than the number of people that can fit into the Bushnell Theater. 5th graders, look around at your classmates, look around at the kids in your school. Chances are that there are many who have been or are currently in the foster care system.
Why is foster care so important to you, Riley?
Well, this topic is important to me because someone very near and dear to my heart at a young age became a foster parent to a child with special needs. During his transition, his foster mom made sure that he was able to develop friendships and found opportunities to make him feel included.
So what's your plan, Riley?
Well, not all foster kids have the same loving experience. Although I am too young to be a foster parent, I still want to make these children's moves to new homes and schools as easy and comforting as possible.
As 5th graders, what can we do to help?
Well, there is so much that you and I can do together to make these friends and classmates of ours who are in the foster care system feel better. With your help, 5th graders, we can accomplish fostering friendships in 3 ways. 1. Hold fostering friendship fundraisers at schools and libraries. This fundraiser will educate the public on the need for foster care parents and ask for new stuffed animals, toys, backpacks, lunch boxes, and clothes. We will provide these foster kids with belongings that can be their own, which hopefully will make the adjustment to their new home and school that much easier. 2. Develop fostering friendships clubs. Students with leadership qualities and positive role model attributes will be paired with students living in foster care. Teachers will serve as adult mentors that these kids can confide in, resulting friendships that can develop in and out of school. 3. I will create a fostering friendships blog. I would start a blog that highlights foster care children enjoying their time with their new friends and family. I think a kid governor should be someone who wants to make a difference in the lives of many children. And I am not someone who's looking to make a difference. I'm willing to make new connections, to find solutions, and take chances. But above all, I enjoy helping my community, and I genuinely care for others. I hope you find my cause and my ideas worthy as voting me as your next kid governor.
That is an example of Riley's work, her wishes for her work, and now I'm going to ask her a little bit about what her journey has been since that time. And I will tell you, these videos will make you feel so good when you watch them. And if you go to the Kid Governor website, just Google Kid Governor, you can see the videos of all of the candidates from the last 5 years. And we've also brought this program from Connecticut to Oregon and New Hampshire. So if you haven't had enough of the Connecticut videos, you can watch the other states. So Riley, can you tell us a little bit about your journey since you went on the Kid Governor cabinet?
Okay, so since I've been working with Kid Governor, the first thing that I wanted to do was do a club around, I wanted to do the club, but unfortunately, because I'm so young, and confidentiality issues, I couldn't do it. So I decided to do some fundraisers at my school. I raised 1,000 toothbrushes, shampoo, conditioner, bed sheets, anything, and I brought them to the Winifred House in my town. They loved them, so happy to see their faces. And then once I went into 6th grade, I decided to do a fundraiser there too. And from there, I was able to raise $329 for these kids for Christmas presents, because foster care kids usually don't have something they can call their own. And it's very important to me that they need something to call their own. So I had a chance where I was at school and I was in gym class, and this girl came up to me and she says, "Riley, were you on the announcements talking about foster care?" And I said, "Yeah, that was me." And she goes, "I was in foster care and I was in DCF. I was originated from there." And it was so special to hear that somebody my age would come up to me and tell me that they were in foster care. It made me feel like I was a good leader and that they feel comfortable talking to me. So this upcoming on, I believe, the 30th at Fancy Bagel in my town, I will be doing a fundraiser there, collecting more money for kids in foster care so they can have more presents and I can help more children in the DCF program.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Riley. Next, I'm going to give everybody a chance to talk a little bit about what they've done and then go on to the questions. Next, I'd like to ask Jackson to tell us a little bit about his work with the Enfield Youth Council and Youth Vote.
Hello. So, I'm Jackson. I work with the Enfield Youth Council and Enfield Youth Vote. Through Youth Council, it's a leadership organization focused on drug abuse prevention and community engagement. We do radio shows, we participate with the community, a lot of community service events. Through Youth Vote, a lot of voter registration drives, getting the kids involved in the youth voting while their parents are voting at the real polls, and staying involved in the community. We keep hosting debates at our high school for local community leaders and politicians, and it's about informing the public non-partisanly and making sure everyone has equity of information.
Great, and would you like to pass it to... Now, Zachary is going to talk a little bit about his work with the 3 parties in his town in voter engagement.
Hi, I'm Zach Zanoni. I'm an Enfield High School senior. Since the start of my wonderful career in high school, I have had the wonderful privilege of working with the 2 major political parties in town, the Enfield Republican Town Committee and the Enfield Democratic Town Committee, as well as a political action committee called Voices for Enfield, turned political party since they received 20% of the vote this November. My experience with that is my main job was as a field worker to engage in voter engagement, to go in my community, specifically in my town council district, was District 2 in Enfield, which encompassed the Thompsonville Village area, which was the most impoverished area of the town, as well as the Enfield Street area, which was the wealthiest area in the town. So it was being able to balance the needs of a multitude of voters with a diverse set of experiences and life challenges, and really being able to talk to them why they need to vote, the important part of transparency in our government and accountability, which we saw as an issue in the town of Enfield, being able for voters to be able to speak their mind and concerns to town council. As we noticed an issue, town council recommended earlier this year that they should remove public comments from town council meetings, and we try to fight back against that.
Thank you very much. I just want to say a word about Enfield. If you are in a town and you feel your school should be doing a better job teaching civics, talk to people in Enfield, because they have a great way of getting students involved. And in fact, for Kid Governor, so many kids run for office that schools do primaries within the schools, but Enfield has a primary for the whole town. So they run the kids from each school, and if their student doesn't win Kid Governor, that student becomes Kid Mayor and works with the mayor for a year. So they do a lot in Enfield on conversations with students from other schools, and also really getting students interested in voting in a variety of ways. Now I'd like to switch over to a college student, Caroline Munn, who is the chapter chair of ConPERG. She's a junior at Trinity College. She has a long history of civic action and impact, and she's going to tell us about some of the work that she's doing now.
Hi, yes, I'm Caroline Munn. I'm a junior at Trinity College, just down the street. I had the really great opportunity last spring to be a part of ConPERG. As you guys probably don't know, ConPERG is the largest student-funded, student-organized group in Connecticut. And PERG is a national organization that works to combat public interest groups on behalf of the public. So I'm the chapter chair at Trinity, and I'm also the Zero Waste Coordinator. We run many different campaigns, such as Zero Waste, Affordable Textbooks, Save the Bees, and New Voters Project. So we run on many different platforms, but my specific platform is Zero Waste. This semester, we've been working to pass a ban to ban polystyrene, also known as styrofoam, and plastic containers from Connecticut. Last spring, we were really lucky to be able to lobby at the State House to pass plastic bags, and that's why there's this 10 cents added to your bags when you go to the grocery store. So that was the work of ConPERG and Trinity to partner to get this plastic ban passed. So that was really exciting in the spring. So this semester, we've been working with clubs and coordinating with many different groups on campus to gain petitions, and we were able to gain 1,000 petitions in order to really show that Trinity is working to get past this plastic container ban and polystyrene, to show that we're really working towards zero waste this semester. So next semester, we're really going to bring everything up so we can go to the State House and lobby again in order to get this plastic container and styrofoam ban passed. So that will be during our short session in the spring. So ConPERG is a really big organization with a big impact, so we really hope that we can really help others join our campaign and show that Trinity is really an impactful school and for civic engagement.
Great, thank you. Now I'm just going to ask everybody some questions, and Caroline, you can hold on to the mic and we'll just pass it down. We always say at the old State House that civics is face-to-face. A lot can be done online, but really it is that one-on-one engagement that makes a big difference. And we also say that it's most effective when people are working together toward their common goal. And I'd like to ask our panelists, what skills have you used to bring others along with you on your civic journey?
Through the plastic campaign that we've been running for the last 3 semesters at Trinity, a part of our work is having to get many constituents on our campus on our campaign, and that just doesn't mean the people in our chapter and other campaigns that we're running. It means we need to be involved with the whole entire community. So for the last 2 semesters, a really big part of our campaign has been getting petitions. So we were able to do many tables in order to get people to know about our campaign and to sign on to our campaign in order for them to know and be educated about plastics and zero waste. And so we're doing many class announcements in addition to club announcements to show that zero waste is a really important issue in this day and age as climate change is really coming upon us. So we were able to get clubs to sign on. So this semester we had 15, and then as I said before, 1,000 petition signatures from the students of Trinity. So just educating people is a really big part of engaging with others and showing them that civic engagement.
Thank you. Riley, how about you? What do you do to get people to join you?
So one thing, such being like so young, I know like what people, like young people want these days. So like one way is bribing them to get in. So like if they help me, I'll help you. So I decided to do a fundraiser to give foster care kids presents for Christmas time. And so I said, well, if you give me money to help these kids, well, then I'll give you a pizza party. Or when I did, back at my elementary school, they brought in donations. They get to wear PJ days. They had to get to wear PJ days to their school. So a lot of things I do is, if they help me, then I'll help you.
Very good. That's a good skill. How about you guys?
Well, one of the things I noticed when going door to door and talking to voters is that we need to address that some voters may fear things. 2 white men walking up, knocking on your door in an urban area, to some people may not be welcoming. And that's not a good way to reach out to voters. And the bottom line is you need to have people that represent you and people that you can feel and relate to. One of the candidates we had for Board of Education, her name was Monica Wright. She runs the warming center in the town of Enfield, and she works heavily with our urban community. And the bottom line is that a lot of people, when you're knocking on the doors, you want there to register to vote. We got English ballots, we got Spanish ballots, but the bottom line is some people fear that we're there for another purpose, and they don't want to open that door. And it deters people from voting. And it's bad because, especially in a small town where really voting is quintessential to everything that happens in your life, where an election was lost in town in November by 27 votes, the bottom line is, what can we do to really reach voters in a way that inspires them and makes them feel welcome? Because the bottom line is, what we see is, unfortunately, we don't have a very diverse set of candidates that are in control of our government and at state level. And a lot of people feel like, how can that person relate for me? That person's from Fairfield County. How can they help Hartford? How can they help Enfield? And we need to put more people in charge that people can actually relate to, and people that are going to stop paying lip service to action and actually be on the ground and fighting for those values, not saying it from the Ritz-Carlton Hotel or wherever you want to do it. And it's time that we actually have people that are engaged in grassroots activism on the ballot.
So Zach's talking a lot about building a relationship with the community, and I think that's the most important way to communicate a message and get people to follow you. Through my organizations, we create large rallies. Just a couple of weeks ago, Community Service Club, which I'm a part of, we organized a climate change rally. We stood outside the entrance to this building and waved down cars, holding signs, yelling at people. We have voter registration drives in the auditorium for all of our seniors who are eligible to register. So it's about getting as many people that can relate to the folks we're targeting, to our constituents, and it's about getting everyone involved in reaching a common goal of of unity for discourse, for civic engagement.
Great, thank you.
That's all.
Why don't you hold on to that and you can do this,
I'll
start
follow.
out the next question.
Great.
A lot of times, as we have heard today, and we all know, civic action is a series of stops and starts. As you move forward, you learn a lot about what works and what doesn't work, and you get better ideas and move things along a little bit better the next time. So I'd like to know from our panelists, can you tell us one lesson that your experience in civic action has taught you?
So a lot of it is about perseverance for me. When you're yelling at seniors to register to vote and they just want to get to class, it's about, you know, keep on asking, keep on being involved, and for every 100 seniors who don't say okay, you get one that says, I'll vote, I'll register, and that's how we're going to make a difference.
One of the lessons I learned is learning not to become complacent. Learning that, yeah, you know, I would love to sit there and watch Netflix, but the bottom line is there's a town council meeting tonight and they're talking about closing a school down. And we need to think about that. We need to figure out our priorities and realize that, you know, showing up for 20 minutes to speak at your town council meeting can change someone's life. It can change hundreds of lives. And too often, people become complacent. 30% of registered voters came out to vote in our municipal election in the town of Enfield. That is pathetic. And we need to understand, number one, why are they not coming out to vote? Number two, how can we make it easier to vote? We don't have early voting in this state, as you know, and we should. And how can we be able to tell voters how important this is? Because it doesn't make sense that more people show out for a presidential election because, yeah, the telegenics are nice and all, but the bottom line is that actually has less effect on your life than what's happening in your local town and county events. And people need to understand that, and they don't, and it's just a damn shame.
Thank you. And Riley is going to tell us something that she's learned.
So one of the stops and starts that I had was I wanted to always do a club so that foster care kids can come in, and like it showed in the video that an adult mentor would be there, and we would create friendships. We would go out bowling or go to movies or anything, but unfortunately that couldn't happen because of confidentiality issues, or most of the time just kids, it's hard to find kids that would want to do that. But also, at certain points, there's a lot of, like, unfortunately, there's some people that, like, you can't find the right time to do a fundraiser. So that was one of the stops and starts that I had to.
I think one of the lessons I've learned from being a president of ComPerg is that you need to listen to many people. We run 4 campaigns with approximately 25 people in our club, so that's a lot of different opinions that you can be hearing and how to really engage with others. So I think listening is a really big part in order to understand how you can really proceed with campaigns and proceed to enact change.
You want to keep going?
Oh, no, that's, yeah.
Okay,
Sorry.
all right. Then we'll go on to the next question that I have, and then we're going to open it up for others to ask questions, because I'm sure you'll have them. How has your current experience in civic action shaped your thoughts about your own future? As you climb the civic action ladder, where do you hope it will lead you? What do you hope to accomplish?
With running the Zero Waste campaign, I've really noticed in my everyday life, like, how I really engage with plastics. Plastics are in our you can't really get away from plastics in your everyday lives. So I really have tried to eliminate the amount of plastic uses I've used with using metal straws or plastic straws that are reusable, not using plastic utensils in the dining hall. And through my work with ComPerg, I've decided to create a final project, which is a roadmap to zero waste for Trinity. Trinity uses plastics in all of our dining halls, and really just doesn't do a very great job about eliminating our waste, other than some of the things that they've enacted, which is compostable composting in one of our dining halls. So I think one of the biggest things that I've learned is I want to really enact change on my community, but also in the greater community of Hartford. So I think it really starts with showing your community that we can decrease our waste, and then I think that will pretty much lead us to enacting more change in the greater community of Hartford.
Thank you. Riley?
So ever since I was young, I always had a passion for helping out the community, because like my grandma's been a big community helper, my mom's always been a community helper. So like I helped out with St. Jude's and then food pantry, but then when Kid Governor opened the doors to me, I decided to help out. And I'm hoping that because I have such a long life ahead of me, I'm hoping that when I am 18, I believe, or 21, I can be a foster parent, and that is my goal until I am that old. And I have a long way ahead of me, and I know it could change, but I really would like that to happen.
Great, thank you.
Well, one of my experiences is from working with all three parties is bridging partisan divide. That there are wonderful, passionate people on all sides of the political spectrum. And especially in these turbulent times, we have come to forget that. And it's troubling because, I remember sitting in a town committee meeting once and hearing the chairwoman of that meeting evoke just truly vulgar things about the people I work with now. And they're wonderful people. And she was a smart lady, the lady that was evoking those things. And what the bottom line is, the letter at the end of your name, unfortunately, has seemed to dominate the conversation right now. And that experience left me to realize that I wanted to be with a group of diverse people, of accepting people. It made me decide why I wanted to apply to colleges in the state of California and why I wanted to make my future there. Being with people that I may have disagreed with on some issues, being with people that I 100% agree with on issues, but understanding that everybody, we need to be a part of a team, a group that loves one another and accepts one another for who they are, and realizes that separating people in the groups, however America has such an attachment to that needs to end. And it's never going to end unless someone stands up and makes a difference. And it's never the wrong time to ask for that change. It's never the wrong time to fight for the right thing. And the bottom line is that unless people stand up, unless we sit here and say this system of political division is not acceptable, it has been dominating our country for years, that we need to end it, we need to offer solutions, we need to go out to people. People need to understand that what happens on late night television shows is not really how Americans feel about each other. And that is what I realized every day, knocking door to door about voters, of what they care about and why they believe that.
So the reason I'm here, and the reason all of us, I think, are attending this conference, is to stay informed and to be able to disagree with each other, to ask questions, and to have conversation about how we can improve our community. Although I may not be going into politics or participating in areas like that, I do want to stay informed, and I need to stay informed. We all do, to foster a strong community and to preserve civil discourse, which is how we reach civic engagement.
Thank you very much. I find it really interesting to ask this group of young leaders where they want to be in the future based on their civic action now, and not one of them said, I want to be president of the United States. That means that they really recognize where civic engagement lives. It can live in the White House or the state capitol, but it also lives on our street and our neighborhoods and where we choose to engage with our neighbors. So that was really, really interesting to hear. Now I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. But first, I would like to issue an invitation. On Monday night, December 2nd, from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock, we're going to be having an open house at the Old State House, where you can see the Old State House and listen to the music of our state troubadour, but also meet students who have participated in the Kid Governor program and people who are engaged in all kinds of different ways. So I hope that you can come. Sorry for that ad. But now I will open up to questions for our panelists. Yes, sir.
I got a question for you guys. I know that you guys talk about civically, want to have people civically involved and stuff of that nature, and educating, especially your peers and stuff of that nature. How come you guys, like, hearing these voices, haven't pushed for like a bill, an act to actually, an educational policy that will actually teach these type of fundamental basics throughout all the demographics and throughout all locations? Because it seemed like it's only fostering in your guys' neighborhoods. But I have my nephew from Hartford, and he does not aware about this project or aware of this situation, and this is in his neighborhood. So, like, what policies can you guys to extend the olive branch to other people from other communities?
What, did you want to say something? Sure. Okay. There you go.
Well, number one, going to the state capitol is truly an unfortunate event, and I hate having to go there. Two, I 100% agree that the state should have a robust civics program. That also comes with funding, something that state legislators always seem resistant to, unfortunately. I agree, we need to reach out to the communities. We need to do more. We need to fight for bills like, it took a while, I know, in Superintendent's Advisory Council. I recommended the superintendent on issues. It took years to try to implement an advanced placement government and politics program. We never had a program that people were able to receive college credit to share their knowledge about government and why they believe that it should work in the way it should. When it talks about specifically about voter engagement, I've worked across the state with organizations, mainly the Connecticut Democratic Party, with voter engagement, which our effort was not within, my efforts specifically were not embedded in a partisan look for people to vote a specific way, but it was understanding the importance of that voting and understanding that, you know, yeah, you may not be that interested, but I can bet you it affects you at every step of the way. And we had some faults in making it easier to vote? Of course we have. And that's something that, you know, I think the governor and the lieutenant governor and the state legislature needs to hear. You know, I have a year left in the state, and I would 100%, I've thought about all types of things that I want to start fighting for my last year. And talking about early voting is one of the main things that I think that I may take up with that, and I may talk to my legislators about, because it's time we start doing on that.
All right.
And I would just like to say that there is a civics requirement in Connecticut, but it doesn't come until you get to high school, and it's only a semester long.
Or they volunteer, because I'm part of the New London Lions Club, so I get some of the high schoolers and middle schoolers, and they have to volunteer like an hour or so many allotted hours for a graduation requirement. I just think that they could actually have policy to expand that and go more into detail, saying that this is more my civic education and stuff of that nature.
I think you're absolutely right, and that is, I don't want to keep sounding like I'm just pushing Kid Governor, but that is one reason why we developed the program, because teachers, first of all, high school, that's too late. You've got to be teaching civics early on, and you've got to be teaching civic action, which is what the Connecticut social studies frameworks call for. Kid Governor, we created as a free program that any teacher can use and become involved in. Kids participate from all over the state, and we did that because teachers need help teaching civics because they don't have time in the classroom to do that, and they don't have even more time to learn what they need to teach in the classroom or what they want to teach in the classroom about civics. So we've done that to provide easy lesson plans that they can just take off the internet and do with their classes and create excitement around understanding civics at a young age. So thank you for that question. That's an important one for Connecticut.
I see it all the time because, like, Lions Club organizations ask, like, who's going to be our next leaders? And it's very sad to see our civic. It's very sad to see our civic organizations falling by the wayside, all of them.
It doesn't matter from your NAACP to, like, they're not engaging any of the younger members. And I'm just one of the few that slipped through the crack that is a part of some of these civic organizations that they talk about.
That's great. I'm glad you slipped through the cracks and got into the Lions Club. You said the Lions Club? Yeah, that's great. Do I have any other questions? Yes, oh, sorry.
I wanted to ask you all, have you all read or the Constitution? Is there any part of the Constitution you like or helped you want to advocate for stuff? Like, it's just, I'm a Constitution person. I carry it with me, so, you know, that's what makes me excited about civics.
Great, thank you. Riley, have you read the Constitution?
No.
Do you want to pass on this question? Yes. Okay. Would you like to? You can think about it? How about you guys?
Yeah, well, I'll share my opinion on one of those. One of the things I recently came about in our Constitution is the Electoral College, which for the longest time I supported, but I now voice opposition to. And I'm understanding that I think it's time. Yeah, it's easier on the news to focus on, you know, Florida, North Carolina, but the bottom line is everyone matters. And just because you're in a state that may only vote red or blue doesn't mean that politicians don't have to show up to your door in November and tell you why you're going to vote for them, because that's how it is. It's a game, and it all matters about the electoral votes, not actually really whether it's best for all of America, but whether it's best for Florida, whether it's best for New Hampshire, whether it's best for Ohio, and it's not about whether it's best for the United States.
Well, I don't know if I can follow that up sufficiently, but I mean, First Amendment all the way, right? Just having this conversation, that's what America's all about. And I don't know, I think they spoke for themselves when they were writing that up. I mean, freedom, baby. Woo! America.
Sally, if I can, first of all, thank you, Zachary, for mentioning the Electoral College, because one thing to remember is over 2.5 million voters in California voted for one of the presidential candidates, right? And those votes didn't count because of the Electoral College. They didn't count. The popular vote was won by one candidate. I'm not going to mention names because we're nonpartisan, but we know one candidate won over 2.5 million more votes than the other candidate. The candidate who won was the Electoral College candidate. The one who lost was the popular vote candidate. One person, one vote. What about that? So I'm glad that you're mentioning that, Zachary. And one thing I should mention, Roland brought up a very important point about access to civics education and the disparities that exist in some school districts, especially inner city school districts. Schools are focusing a lot more on math, reading, and science, the so-called core content areas. And that's important. But what we've found historically is that those districts then don't have access to civics education. So the kids who are usually African American, Latino, and students of color, find themselves not really having the same kind of access to civics education that other kids do in the more wealthier districts, school districts. So the Secretary of the State office started a project some years ago about the presidential election that combines math, science, and reading elements into talking about the presidential election in a way that integrates civics learning as part of core content reading. So those are some of the creative ways that we can do to push for expanding civics education in inner city school districts, for example, that have suffered because of the focus on the core content areas.
Great. Thank you. Any other question? Did you have a question?
I know some other states, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, they mail their ballots to every home, every address, and then their turnout increased. So is Connecticut working on that policy? They should.
Do you know the answer to that one?
I don't.
You don't know the answer? Does anybody know the answer to that one? No. They're not.
Okay. Dang.
So it sounds like we're not working on that issue.
Yeah,
So
it sounds like the
we need-
legislatures have more important things to worry about.
And I think that question brings up a really good point. It is hard to be actively engaged if you don't really know what's going on. So there is a lot to cover in this world. You can't know everything about plastics and foster care and voting. So you can try, and it's good to try, but even if you pick a lane and decide, this is my cause and I'm gonna be informed about it, that is powerful, because people need to be informed about the things that they act on. So to be well informed, to pick an issue, maybe pick an issue every year and decide to work on that, but knowing what's going on in your issue so that you can act on it and encourage others to act on it as an ambassador is really important. Did you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to know, is anyone at the state level investigating how many people are moving from other states here just for the health care?
Does anybody know the answer to that?
Or, because some people, you know, I grew up in Alabama, and I know it's a red state, and I've met people personally who've moved here for the social benefits, and I know people who are illegally living in other states who are still getting the social benefits, and how it's impacting the budget. Even though they're cutting the health care benefits, there are some people who make it their whole objective. A young lady from South Carolina, she couldn't get a hearing aid in South Carolina. She said, at least I can hear now. I mean, certain medical benefits here are great in comparison to southern states or in other places around. Even in Colorado, the Medicaid is not as good. And that's a huge issue that I think it should be uniform. I mean, at the federal, it's a federal program, for crying out loud. Everybody should at least have the dignity, preserve their dignity and their health. I mean, instead of coming here just to this state, just for those medical benefits or those social benefits. Some people have blatantly said it, I'm here because of such and of that. Otherwise, I think I still would be in the place where I was born.
Thank you for that. Zach, did you want to?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the Supreme Court decided that health care wasn't a right and didn't believe that states should be required to expand upon Medicare and Medicaid, to which they should. You know, states like California, states like Massachusetts, I think, are a great model for how healthcare should be. But I think really what needs to happen is healthcare needs to have a massive overhaul at the federal level. So it doesn't matter what your zip code is, that everyone has healthcare as a right.
Thank you. Well, I think we're going to close our panel now, but I would really like to thank these wonderful young people here with us today, and I know, please know that their energy, passion, and wisdom is multiplied throughout the state. We just don't always see it. So thank you for your questions of them, and thank you.
Thank you to this outstanding panel, and we're very inspired by all the great work you're doing, so thank you for contributing to our communities. Thank you. Scott Warren is the Chief Executive Officer of Generation Citizen, a nonprofit organization that he co-founded at Brown University with fellow student Anna Ninan during their senior year while working with students in the public schools in Providence, Rhode Island. Since then, Scott has grown Generation Citizen to become one of the premier civics education organizations in the country, promoting action civics across diverse geographies through best-in-class programming and concrete policy change. Scott has served as social entrepreneur in residence at Brown University and at Tufts University. He was named an Echoing Green Fellow in 2010 and a Draper Richards Kaplan Fellow in 2012. He continues to write on the diverse topics such as political engagement, African politics, sports, etc., and has been published and featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Christian Science Monitor, Education Week, the New York Daily News, the Huffington Post, San Diego Union Tribune, Sports Illustrated, Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Providence Journal. Quite a diverse group of publications indeed. In March of 2019, Scott published his first book, Generation Citizen, The Power of Youth in Politics, which was available for sale and still available for sale right here in the back of the room. So please feel free to purchase the book. Proceeds from the sale of the books go directly to benefit Generation Citizen, the organization that he co-founded. So please take a moment to, if you can, support that great work and purchase one of the books. By the way, the book has inspired some of what Scott will be sharing with us today. And we're fortunate to have him here with us. So I'm honored to introduce, and please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Scott Warren. Scott.
All right. Thanks, Val, for that, and to all of you for having me today. Really excited to be here. I got to listen into some of the sections and excited to go after the great young speakers as well, because that's what Generation Citizen does and what we believe in as well. So I'm just going to talk for a little bit about my own story, about what Generation Citizen does, and would love to spend more time opening it up to questions for anyone. I live in New York, so it's actually really interesting hearing about Connecticut issues, and specifically on the last panel about civics education. We think a lot about civics education policy and how to ensure that all young people, especially those young people that haven't had that much access to civics education and youth political participation, receive more. But I think the one framework that I wanted to provide going in today, and I don't need to convince you all of this, but I think it's an interesting time in our country to be thinking about it, is one that I very much, especially right now, believe in the power of democracy and believe that democracy can work, which I know in today's age can seem like a misguided trope, but I still, it's what gets me up in the morning every day. I passionately believe in democracy as a system of government that can bring us all together as individuals to make a collective difference. And a lot of what was happening today was the power of democratic discourse at work. And I believe that in order to get to a better democracy, which I think we can all agree that we need, that young people need to be the way forward. So I think that sort of forms the framework of how I think it forms the framework for the book and what I do every day. So quickly on my own story, because it's somewhat relevant to this. So I'm originally from San Diego, California. So when it starts to get winter out in the Northeast, I live in New York now. Sometimes I wish I was back there, but it is good to be on the Northeast. But when I was 8 years old, my dad actually joined the State Department, the Foreign Service. So I've been hearing a lot about Foreign Service officers in the last few weeks. But so I spent 8 to 18 growing up abroad in Latin America and East Africa. So I moved every 2 years, lived in the Dominican Republic, Argentina, Kenya, and Ecuador. And in those countries, and I was young like a lot of the folks that just spoke, I had a lot of experiences where I was able to see the power of democracy in action and also the fragility of it as something that we need to constantly cultivate and mend and meld and not take for granted. And so I remember in 2002, I was actually living in Nairobi, Kenya, and had the opportunity to serve as a 10th grader as an observer in the Kenyan elections. It was the first truly democratic elections that Kenya had, and it was late December, and my dad and I went to this rural town called Rongai, and at 5:45 in the morning, we went outside this rural schoolhouse, and already at 5:45, you had lines, hundreds of people long, waiting to cast their vote because they had never actually cast a vote in their country's history that had mattered. And throughout the day, we just met more and more people, which is what Val was saying, one person, one vote, that were so ecstatic to make their voice heard. And at night, we went in these schoolrooms, and they didn't have electricity, so they were literally kerosene lights as they were casting the votes they counted the votes one by one. So it's a very powerful concept to think about democracy as literally being counted by a kerosene lamp in a schoolhouse. And what happened in that election is that the opposition candidate, Mwai Kibaki, actually won, which is very rare in emerging democracies for that to happen. So as a 10th grader to see that, it was a very powerful experience. So that's the power of democracy, what can happen when it actually works. But the fragility of it came to light. Kenya had elections 5 years later. That same candidate who is now president, Mwai Kibaki, rigged the election. There was violence in the streets, sort of like what just happened in Bolivia, and over 1,000 people died. And so you had this amazing election in 2002, 5 years later. You had over 1,000 people that were killed. I was actually, I observed an election there a year and a half ago. Same sort of fervor in the streets, people incredibly excited to participate. This time I was outside a big schoolhouse, and literally there were probably 1,000 people waiting at 6 a.m. And the gates to the school opened, and I got trampled upon because people were running to vote. That's how excited they were to actually participate. But then there were some rigging that happened in the post-election results, and the election actually got nullified. So they had to do a re-vote. So I lived in, these experiences happened my entire childhood. I graduated from high school in Ecuador. A few months before I graduated, there was a coup, and the president was deposed of because people were frustrated. My parents lived in Zimbabwe, and so I had the opportunity to visit there during 2008 runoff elections. And one of the most powerful experiences in my life, where I met opposition members that literally we'd go to some place where they were making sure that they weren't being followed, and they told me that they had been tortured, that their families had been threatened, but they were willing to push forward because of this concept of democracy, because they believed in their country, they believed in their people, and they were willing to put their lives on the line for that. So that's sort of how I grew up, this notion of, and for me, democracy, and it's a term that I think sometimes is ugly, but it literally is individuals coming together to make a collective difference. It's what you all are doing today. It's not about agreeing on everything. It's working through disagreements. It's pushing forward on stuff. But it's individuals coming together to make that collective difference. I came back to school relatively close to here in Providence. I went to Brown. And I first actually was very involved in international activism relating to a genocide going on in Darfur, Sudan. And so I helped to organize my classmates, and we went down to the Rhode Island State House. We advocated and rallied at Brown, and we got Brown to become one of the first universities in the country to divest its assets from companies doing business in Sudan. Rhode Island became one of the first states. We organized buses to go down to a rally in DC where 30,000 people got to listen to folks like George Clooney and then Senator Barack Obama. But it was this galvanizing moment of fighting for something. But I sort of had a realization as I went on in college. One was that we're fighting for something going on abroad, and there were a lot of challenges in our own communities in Providence and Rhode Island. But there was another thing, and this sort of came up as well, but a lot of young people want to make the world a better place. They want to make their communities a better place. I think there's sometimes this trope that young people are apathetic or engaged in their phone. I think the last panel showed how false that narrative is. But a lot of young people want to make the world a better place, but don't see government and local politics as the best way to do so. And that's, people were talking about the low voting rates and people not being involved in their communities. That's something that's happening all across the board. And there's a whole host of reasons for that, many valid. Many young people have grown up, especially marginalized young people and young people of color, have grown up in a system where their voices don't matter, where the system doesn't pay attention to them. So it's oftentimes logical not to participate in a system that doesn't actually listen to you or represent your voices. But there's another problem, and this was talked about as well, is that we don't really teach civics in our schools anymore. And when we do, it's here are the three branches of government. Here's a bill becomes a law. It's the most boring class in school, right? And when we do teach civics, it's not taught equitably too. There's a lot of young people in this country that get access to civics education in ways that perpetuate the power dynamics that have come to define America since its inception in history. So GC was started as a way, sort of hearkening back to that same excitement that I saw and felt in the streets of Kenya, and this power of democracy that I could feel. How do we get all young people to recognize the power of their voices, to recognize the power of politics, by getting civics back into the classroom and making it the most exciting, action-oriented, relevant class in school? And that's what I think democracy can be, and that's what I think civics can be. And so Generation Citizen was started, and we promote something that we call action civics. So you put the action before the civics, and hopefully it changes everything. But what we really want to do is for young people to learn civics by doing civics. It's like the kid governor. It's like what you all were doing. But the best way to learn civics is not just here's how government works. It's actually to get your hands dirty and get engaged in the system. So we work with middle and high schools across the country. And young people choose very local issues that they care about. It could be teen jobs, it could be public transit, it could be police brutality, it could be the prison to school pipeline, school to prison pipeline. Any of those issues, they figure out what the root cause of those issues are, and then they take real action. largely at the local governmental level. So they'll look at things like affordable housing and figure out a local city ordinance that would provide tax incentives to landlords that provide more affordable housing. I was just talking to a student yesterday that was working on police brutality, and they focused on a whole community liaison program between police officers and students. We have students that have focused on getting homeless shelters built and open year-round in Berkeley. But it's this real, it's students taking action on issues that they care about. A lot of students focus on immigration, especially now, and then learning politics through actually doing politics. And so, as Val said, we work in middle and high schools. We work across the country. So we're in New York and Boston and Rhode Island, California, Oklahoma, Texas. So trying to get into to red and blue states alike. Working with over 30,000 students this year, and it's amazing. I think one of the things I've learned is that for young people specifically, we never ask them what they actually think. And so for young people to be asked, what do you think, what do you want to take action on, can be such a powerful experience for them. And I think, you know, and this is what I read about in my book, but I think sometimes we forget that whenever we see positive change in this country, young people are at the forefront. I mean, you can look at the civil rights movement. You can look at the Lowell Mill Girls in Massachusetts in the 1830s and 40s. You can look at the abolitionists. It's this unique blend of idealism and wanting to and being able to see democracy for what it can be rather than it is now. And also, and I think we see this a lot, a sense of irreverence and a sense of not accepting the status quo that I think often leads to positive change. I wanted to relate a few stories and challenges that I've seen along the way, and then potentially get into solutions and then open it up as well. But I was thinking on the way here today, and I wrote about this in my book, but I think sometimes, you know, I can stand here and talk to you about all of the great work Generation Citizen does. And it's important to remember that democracy and politics is full of progress and it's full of challenges along the way. There's never, I could sit here and we could all get together and say, okay, here are the actual steps to make change, and you do this, and you contact your representatives, and you get people together, and that doesn't actually mean that you'll receive the change that you want to see in the world. I think that that's both the power and challenge with politics and democracy, is that it takes a lot of work and it doesn't end overnight too. But we've worked with thousands of young people, and one of the favorite young people that I ever worked with was a student named Anthony Mendez, and again, I write about him. But Anthony, we have these Civics Day events, and he came up to me at the end of one of the Civics Days, and he said, you know, I've really liked going through this Generation Citizen program, and I want to get even more involved. I'm passionate about the fact that my school district doesn't receive as much funds as folks in more affluent school districts, and what can I do about that? So he got really engaged with us. He went to Albany to advocate. He got an internship with the city council person, just became an all-star student. He ended up getting, and this is why I think about it today, he got a scholarship to go to the University of Hartford. I actually haven't been to Hartford till today, but he got a scholarship to go to the University of Hartford. 6 months in the University of Hartford, we get a call from Anthony, and it turns out that he's going to be Michelle Obama's guest at the State of the Union. And so we were so excited for him, and he was, we saw him on TV, his smiling face. We were so excited for him, and he was sort of our all-star student. 5 months later, I was sort of in touch with Anthony. He comes into my office. He says, I got to talk to you. You know, things aren't going as well. And he just dropped out of the University of Hartford. And so he had you know, had all of this success. He had sat next to Michelle Obama, and when he was sitting next to her, he was struggling. He was a first-generation college student. He didn't know how to succeed. University wasn't providing with him all the right resources, but he felt all this pressure too for being this all-star activist. And you know, I've stayed in touch with Anthony, but it's one of these stories that I think about a lot because it shows everything that I've been talking about, the power of what can happen when someone engages, but also that there's not a linear progression to this type of change as well. And he's someone that I think sometimes we're too often, and when we run nonprofits, we can do this, and this happens to me too, but too often quick to sort of glamorize and talk about how great people are. And Anthony is exceptional, but when it comes to democratic change, it doesn't happen overnight. And we need to, it is this sort of mix that I always think about is how can individuals actually work together to get that collective change? And so Anthony's story is one I think about a lot, just in making sure that we don't glamorize change makers too much either, because everybody's fallible and everybody has their flaws. And this work is hard and takes time too. I've seen a number of challenges in addition to that as sort of pertaining to our democracy that I wanted to sort of throw out to think about that I know that you all have thought about as well. And what we're trying to do about them at Generation Citizen. So one is that, and I think that this is probably the biggest challenge that I see in our democracy right now. So a lot of people throw out statistics about how young people, I think only a third of young people can name all three branches of government. The US has one of the lowest voting rates of any developed country in the world. We can go through statistic left and right. I think the scary statistic for me is only a quarter of young people, 18 to 30-year-olds, believe that it's very important to live in a democracy. And when that's the case, when young people literally don't believe in the system of governance that we live in, and again, a lot of this is because they're growing up, we're growing up, I'm a millennial as well, in a world where we're going to be worse off than our parents' generation. It's one of the first generations in a long time that's happened to. It makes sense, but at the same time, in order for democracy to work, you have to believe in the system. And so I think that's something that we need to think about. We need to think about how can we ensure that people actually believe in the system of governance and recognize it as well. And one thing, and I was thinking about this with some of the conversations that were going on, I think sometimes we have this challenge when we work with our young people of you can teach them either that the system works and all you have to do is participate in it, so that's one pull, or the other pull is the system's irrevocably broken and you can't do anything to change it. So this is false. The system doesn't work as well as it should. And this is fundamentally disempowering if there's nothing you can do about it. So how do we have that honest conversation about the system doesn't work as well as it can, but we need to push forward at the same time as well? Another problem, and this came up on the last panel, but the hyperpolarization, the effective polarization that we see in this country right now is a huge problem. And I see, this is a nonpartisan space, that I see this on all sides of the aisle. But the fact that we demonize people that don't agree with this. One of my favorite stats on this is Pew does this poll that asks parents, would you be okay if your kid married someone of the opposite political party? And in 1960, I think it was 3% of Democrats and 4% of Republicans would have a problem if their kid married someone of the opposite political party. And recently, I think 2 years ago when they asked this poll, it was about 55 and 60% of people had a problem with that. And that just shows, it's bigger than race, it's bigger than religion, it's bigger than anything else. The fact that we fundamentally don't believe that people that have disparate political beliefs than us are good people. But in order for democracy to work, it's not about my opinion or the highway, it's about how do we actually convince people, how do we actually come together to a common consensus. I also think, and I think this panel today has been good for this, or this conference today has been good at this, but we're too focused on the immediate. This came up too, but we're too focused on the presidential elections, we're too focused on what can we be doing right now. Democracy, at the end of the day, is about process. It's not about outcomes. And so what I mean by that is I think oftentimes we get to a place where we think about, okay, how do we ensure that we have health care for all? How do we ensure that we have free college? A lot of the policies that's in our lexicon. Those are all important, but what needs to start is how do we ensure that all people can have their voices represented in the system? If you start with that principle, if you start with democracy being more important than anything else, you'll get to the policy outcomes. But that takes more time, and I think that sometimes we're just often opt to go into the more glamorous sort of presidential political work rather than focused on democracy. So I think those are those are some of the biggest challenges we see. And so what do we actually do about it? So at Generation Citizen, as I said, what we're trying to do is focus on the foundations of how to make democracy work better. And the foundations of how to make democracy work better from our vantage point are to ensure that young people are excited about democracy, that they want to participate, that they're leading the way forward, that we're listening to their unique knowledge of the issues that they face, whether it's how they interact with the police, whether it's how they interact with the school system, and that we're recognizing that in this age of instant gratification, that democratic change and political change takes a lot of time. And so I think that that's something important as well. So it's investing in and listening to young people. So I told the story of Anthony, sort of wanted to close and then we can open it up to questions too. But another young person that I've interacted with a lot, who's also in the book, is a young man named Julian. And Julian's originally from Colombia and came over just 5-6 years ago. He didn't speak any English. And watching his political journey in real time, He's learned English. His school in Lowell did action civics. His class actually worked on gun control because an elementary school student brought a gun to school in their backpack. And so just the fact that guns were lying around homes. And so his class actually organized a gun buyback program. They worked with the local police department. They worked with a lot of community associations. So I've gotten to know Anthony, and what's been so powerful about engaging with him is that by participating in his local community, by participating in politics, he, as a Colombian immigrant, is what I feel the future of democracy is for this country. And the road for him has not been linear, just like Anthony's. He's had challenges. He's had challenges with the immigration system. His parents have had challenges with the immigration system. But he believes in the power of politics. He believes in the power of his voice, and he believes in the power of his community as well. And he believes in a country that's more representative than the one we see now. And so I just leave you, I think, and we can get into questions as well, but I think it's a very easy time to be cynical about politics, to be negative about our democracy, and I'm there a lot of the days as well. But I mean, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. I still fundamentally believe, when you believe in democracy, you believe in the fundamental power of people, because democracy really is what we make of it, and it really is the people that comprise it. So even in dark times, I believe in folks like you all getting together on a Saturday, all day on a Saturday, to talk through the difficult issues in Connecticut. I believe in the young people that were on this panel and how much we all want to push for that better tomorrow. And for me, the fact that young people are continuing to push us for that democracy that we can be, rather than the one that we have now, is the history of this country. I mean, the history of this country has been one continually of oppression and then eventual inclusion. The Declaration of Independence was written, all men are created equal. It left everybody that wasn't a white landowner off the table. And so the fact that we continue to move in a direction where more and more people are represented, it always starts with young people, and we continue to be a country and a people that continue to push forward. So irrespective of everything else going on, I'm still hopeful, and I'm hopeful because of people like you, and I'm hopeful because of young people as well. So wanted to stop there, and then we'll open it up for questions as well.
Hello, my name is Jamie Bianca. I am currently a junior at Trinity College, and I just had a question regarding a student that you talked about, Anthony, who you said was a first-generation college student, and I am first-generation as well. And it has been a very interesting journey for me, I will say, because I am very and extremely blessed to be afforded certain scholarships and financial aid to attend Trinity, and that has been a huge, huge blessing for me. But sometimes there is still this little notion, this little voice in the back of my mind when I'm advocating and when I'm standing up for, myself and my peers, that says, you don't belong here or you can't do it. And, I will say it is a minute voice, and as I've grown more confident in my journey, I've learned how to start silencing it, but it's still a bit pervasive. So I was just wondering, what advice can you give me as a first-generation college student and as an advocate, to continue in my journey despite that little voice that tells me that I can't?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the question, and I think, I will say from my vantage point, and I'm not a first-generation college student, I mean, universities have realized and colleges have realized that they need to get better on this. They need to provide more support. I remember even around where I go to school, it's the small stuff like they used to close the cafeterias over Thanksgiving, and a lot of people can't afford to go home for Thanksgiving, so it's small stuff like that. I think on what you're talking about, I mean, first of all, just applaud you for doing that. I can imagine that it's quite difficult to do so. Having gotten to know and talk to Anthony a lot, he just felt extreme pressure too. And I mean, he felt pressure because he's at the State of the Union, but also pressure from his family, pressure from his friends. And so I think that, I would encourage you to be an advocate for yourself and an advocate for first-generation students, because I think it's very powerful. I think your story is powerful. And I think that recognizing that you have, even just being here and what you said, you have what it takes to succeed. And we also need the perspective of folks like you who haven't grown up in a system where everything is just open for you. And so I think that that's one of the things that I think about a lot with someone like Anthony, is we actually need your voice there. So I wouldn't think of it, and I know this is me just saying it, I wouldn't think of it as, you know, the voice saying that you don't belong. I actually think we need your voice as much or more than others, because we don't have enough of you, and we need to figure out how to create a democracy where we let more voices in. So I don't know how helpful that is, but I mean, having talked to Anthony a bunch, we need to provide more support for first generation college students. So I mean, that's something that we as a society need to do more of, but also just really applaud you in your journey so far too.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have a question. It was more like regarding, like, when you said that one of the people were like the future of democracy and your views of democracy, like, it kind of takes a shot at some of the people whose ancestors actually fought for some of these situations, have bled and died for these situations, and somebody who immigrated over here is just reaping the benefits off of these situations that we haven't even still even accomplished and gotten in America. So like, with those type of things going on historically, and that's still going on present of this day, how can you say that this person is really the face of democracy at this time frame? Like, can you please go and explain that?
No, I mean, it's a great question, and I think one of the things that we think a lot about in Generation Citizen too is how do we ensure that the history of this country, for example, the New York Times had the 1619 project that came out.
Oh yeah, she didn't even know about the 1866 Act when she got confronted about it. Yeah, I'm aware about that woman in real time. So yeah, I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good. but making sure that we talk about our full history, and I think what's powerful about this country is it has been one that's been molded with the negative and people pushing forward to. So when I say that someone's the face of democracy, I don't mean it in the sense of, I mean, I think literally every person that's here, for the good and the bad, is someone that is the face of democracy in many ways. And I think that it's something where we have to confront, and in order to teach civics well, you also have to confront our history.
Yeah, like for example, like one of the civic clubs I'm a part of, like they didn't allow black guys in until 1967, right. And they literally locked them out as well as women. So like when you have policies like that severely cripple a community, that actually makes them teach basically a backwards version of politics, basically as a result of that, I can't really say, I really can't go in the notion of when you say that this person from another country who's reaping the benefits off of what my ancestors did is the face of democracy.
Well, I think, I think that one of the challenges is that, you know, this country is one of immigrants, period. I mean,
But also slaves built it. So 100%. So when people use the term immigrants very loosely, I have to really understand, put it in the context of historical preference in that situation.
And I think dealing with the aftermath of slavery is something that we need to do more of. It's why folks are talking about reparations, I think, in a way that people haven't talked about it. I think that's healthy. I think that reconciling with the history, and I'm not going to stand up here and say who I think should be sort of thought about over others in democracy. I just think that we have to reconcile with history. And I think that's part of what being a good democratic citizen is. And so, I mean, that's a conversation we should continue to have, and I'm happy to continue to have as well.
Thank you for even addressing the question. I thought that was really cool.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Hi. One of the questions I have is, how have you found it to be effective to engage folks that civics have actually been used against in creating policies that have not helped them at all, has actually hurt them? And they're all part of civics, right?
Yeah.
They're all a part of the process. And voices that have not been listened to in these processes, I think what we're seeing is a disconnect in believing that their voices will be listened to in these processes. And how would you address that?
I mean, I think it's a great question, and the history of this country is one in which we've continued to tell folks that their voices don't matter, and we continue to tell people that that they can't come to the table. I mean, the voting age was just lowered to, I mean, women didn't get the right to vote until the beginning of the 20th century. The voting age was just lowered to 18 in 1973. And so you have sort of this constant reality that people literally can't participate. And then you have a country, and I see this in our schools all the time. I mean, we work with a lot of urban schools that don't receive the same resources as more affluent schools, where students are walking through metal detectors with dilapidated walls. When that happens, students start the day thinking, oh, the public system doesn't care about what I think. So I completely get the point. I think what I would say to that, and I'm not trying to be naive or idealistic here, but I think the way to change the system is to participate. So that's sometimes a hard thing to say, but I think that you see examples of that throughout history. You see an example of that through the Civil Rights Movement, to Black Lives Matter, to the marriage equality movement, where folks who have been oppressed from the system make sure that their voices are heard, sometimes through formal political participation, sometimes through informal political participation, through rallies, through protests. And so I think that the way that our country works, and again, I think that this is the positive part of it, is that we're able to make progress when people show up. I think another positive movement that you've seen is the Dreamers, so folks that have been undocumented that refuse to ensure that their voices are discounted. And so I guess that's what I'd say, is that I completely understand people that feel like their voices don't matter. The reality is, the worse politics get, the more important it is to get political, because if we don't get political, the people whose perspective you don't like, their voices are going to get more powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm a senior at Penn State, and I was just curious if Generation Citizen does work with colleges and universities, and if you don't, if that's something you guys are looking to expand into in the future.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So we actually started, the model that we first started with, and I went to college and started at college, was actually we partnered college volunteers with middle and high school teachers to teach the class. We called the college students democracy coaches. So it was a really cool system just of providing peer-to-peer mentorship. So we do that in the sites that we're in. We don't currently work in Penn State or Pennsylvania, but can talk about that. But I will say, I mean, you know, sitting by University of Connecticut and University of Hartford, there's a lot more that colleges need to do to engage young people civically too. One of the, I think, we're in turbulent economic times, but I think institutions of higher education, I heard this recently, sometimes can be seen as higher education, H-I-R-E. They're very focused on how do you ensure that young people are employable, not that they're civically engaged. So, I mean, we can talk offline too, because I think that there's a lot more that colleges can do to ensure that students are engaged in their community, that students are active in learning, and so I think that's something that needs to happen more. We can talk about doing more at Penn State as well.
Sure, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Voice matters. And so, as somebody who dabbles in politics locally, the civic process I am encouraged by. But I think, as you mentioned, participation is what is the most important the most important aspect of democracy, is having a voice and then using the voice. And I think that people approach democracy as though it is somehow fair when it is not. And I think there's a false expectation because everything should be equal and equitable, therefore it is. But it's sort of like if you show up to Thanksgiving dinner and you want, chicken, and no one there eats chicken, but you had a chance to participate in what was going to be served, but you decided to sit it out. Now you're mad because there's no chicken at the Thanksgiving dinner.
Right.
And so if you have a voice, your voice is only as good as your willingness to use it. And democracy is heavy lifting. And in my never to be humble opinion, a lot of constituents are lazy. They want to show up and eat, but they don't want to do any work to make it happen.
Right.
And so I think the biggest challenge is getting people to understand that while we can catalog the complaints, it's different to actually put your fingers in the dirt, get out there, and make a difference by showing up to things like Board of Education meetings, where you will have an opportunity to talk about what the curriculum is going to be, as opposed to saying, well, we don't teach civics. Well, it's your government. You want civics taught? vote for your Board of Ed members and then hold them accountable. As young sister Reese said, you know, you have a constitution. That is the base. Make it work for you. You know, the original airplane was made to bomb people. That doesn't keep you from flying places anymore. So, you know, the Constitution might have been made for, but it is here. Those are the rules. And I think they can be very beneficial to us if we look at them as the rules which we want to use as opposed to what it was intended for in 1700 something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you on the fact that, I mean, with all that, but the fact that democracy is heavy lifting too. And I think that convincing people that it is something that is worthwhile, even though it's difficult, even though, and again, I think we're in a day and age right now where we want everything to be more efficient, right? We want to be able to order our food and have it come right away. We want to be able to order a car and get it right away. And so with democracy, I think sometimes we want to say, okay, what is and I've heard conversations like this, what is that app that we can use so that people will listen to us right away? And that's not how democracy works. It's fundamentally inefficient, and it should be inefficient because it's a process. And that means that it's going to take a lot of time and it's going to take a lot of work. But I think, and I didn't talk as much about this, and I think you brought a good point, there's a responsibility to it as well. So there's opportunities, but there's responsibility. So figuring out how we articulate that responsibility, I think that's something with young people I think is important too.
Yes, Scott, I'm so glad that you talked about the idea of equity within the context of civics education. And when I've spoken to Latino and African American high school and college students, and I've talked about the Children's March, for example, in the South, and the Latino Student March in Texas,
yeah.
Most of them don't know about it because it's not in the textbooks. And so that's an important piece. Unfortunately, we live in many school districts. The curriculum is pretty much straightforward, built to exclude a lot of experiences of the people, especially people of color. And so youth of color and students of color don't often see the impact that people like them have had historically. Is that something that you're doing with Generation Citizen as well? And how have you managed the challenge of working with school districts that may be resistant to that?
Yeah, it's something that we've talked a lot about is how, and I will say this on both sides. So it's how do you teach young people and people of color about the history of this country, of one that was built on the backs of enslaved people, the one that has excluded people, the one that continues to have a lot of racial discriminatory practices in play. How do you also teach white students that that's the reality as well? Because I think that we can't just focus on teaching people of color that. So that's something that we're thinking and talking a lot about. Is what does it mean to have an equitable democracy where every voice matters, but you can't discount what's happened historically in order to get there. The policies are in place that do or don't aid certain people from participating in the process. And so we've tackled it and are starting to tackle it more from a specifically political and voting lens. So who are the people that have participated? What are the challenges that people have had in terms of participating? And what does that mean for the current context? And it goes to previous points too, that we don't want people to take away from it. We don't want them to be so disempowered that they don't participate, but we want them to be clear-eyed about the challenges that they and their communities have faced. And so I think that balance is something that's important but challenging. The last point, there's an access question on this too, where white and more affluent schools are more likely to get an experiential civics education. And when we have a country where there's power imbalances, I feel like the fundamental challenge that we face right now is inequality, economic inequality, political inequality, but we have unprecedented and historical economic inequality in this country. When that's the case, I almost see what we're doing as redistributing power. So how do you ensure that people who have historically not have access to power have more power to get to a more equitable democracy?
That's very interesting that you bring up the word power, because I was going to ask you about the power dynamics and stuff of that nature. Because when people look at power, power is more exclusive, meaning excluding people from the situation instead of being more inclusive. So how can, based off the power dynamics and stuff of that nature, how can being more inclusive is actually going to gain more power for certain individuals that's already being oppressed? Like,
Yeah.
you got to really explain that to me.
Yeah, so I think power, I read about power in my book as well. I think power is a really important and interesting term that has a negative connotation, but I think in order to make political change, we all need to have power and gain power. And thinking about how political action is sort of in the realm of gaining power is something that I think is really important. And so to Val's question too, I think a lot of this is, so how do you get power? You get power through mobilizing others. You get power through being informed. You get power through being elected to public office. So all of those things are about gaining power. And I mean, power sometimes isn't a zero-sum game. So when I talk about redistributing power, there's certain people in this country that have had access to power. There's certain people that haven't, and we need to figure out how to change that around too. So I think that that's something that's really important.
All right, thank you for asking that other question too as well. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you talk about what you think the role of media, both traditional media and also things like social media, are in promoting civic engagement, particularly among youth, or perhaps inhibiting it in some other ways?
Yeah, it's a great question. I just watched last night Sacha Baron Cohen's ADL. He just received an award from the Anti-Defamation League and made a speech on social media, which is worth watching if you haven't yet. I actually think that this is one of the biggest challenges, I think, right now, because so I did research and wrote about this, but I think for millennials, something like 66% use Facebook as their primary news medium. And so when that's the case, there's just going to be disinformation that flows from there. And I think it's very scary that's probably, there are good sides of it. I think the good sides to social media is that folks, especially in places like the Middle East, are seeing what democracy is like in other places and are able to, you've seen the same thing with the spat of police shootings here, that they can broadcast it. But I think there needs to be a lot more emphasis on media literacy in schools and how to actually critically look at information, what works, what's biased, what's not, that we all need to do too. I mean, this isn't just for young people, but adults too. I think we don't look at media in a critical lens enough. So I think the fact that media is more democratized means that more people can push stuff out. It means also that we have to be more critical in terms of how we're getting our news. And I think social media companies specifically need to recognize that they are not just platforms, but they are media providers, and they need to think about their own content as any media provider would. Because I think that just seeing themselves as a network for people to push stuff out, you're always gonna have people that spew hatred, and if you're not actually moderating that, then that hatred is gonna spill out into the world more, which is I think what's happened through social media platforms. So there needs to be much more regulation that's happened there, and there needs to be more media literacy that happens at the same time.
I'll be brief, and I wanted to piggyback off of what he said about social media, because like YouTube right now, there are certain channels where they are breaking the back of our Democratic candidates that are being brought forth because they don't have certain agendas and stuff of that nature. And that's not coming from the mainstream media. This is actually coming from YouTube and other platforms as well, basically from other informed individuals that are doctors or lawyers, etc. So like the game has really changed when it comes to social media and how it's being presented towards people gathering information. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I think that there are ways in which social media has allowed folks that wouldn't otherwise be seen to be seen and heard. So that's the positive aspect to it. But I think I mean, we're going to have to wrestle with everything you said and everything that was talked about there too. And just recognize that, I mean, they have to be regulated, and we have to, the fact that false advertisements are seen as free speech, that's not how things should work. And so I think that's going to be really important too.
During your work in advocacy engagement with youth, have you found it difficult to engage youth who have incarcerated parents or have been incarcerated themselves? And if you have, how did you address that with them being inclusive in the campaigns?
It's a great question, and I mean, I was hearing some of the comments earlier. I mean, we need to do a much better job as a society figuring out, I mean, one interesting thing, actually, the last election I observed in Kenya, they actually allowed incarcerated people to vote. So there's interesting things in terms of that came up in the Democratic Forum recently. We also do work in Oklahoma, which has the highest rate of incarcerated women in the entire world. And so it's something that we've had to wrestle with a lot, and it goes to what we were talking about before in the sense of a lot of young people feel like the system fundamentally hasn't cared about what they think. And so I think I'm not going to provide a perfect answer, but I think it's about recognizing the reality of that, and not falsely telling people that, you know, everything's all right, but also ensuring that they know that they have a voice and place at the table too.
Thank you.
Please, let's give a round of applause to Scott. Today we've heard some great speakers, young panelists, civic ambassadors doing some great work in the communities. And you've also heard a great keynote speaker talk about civics education and making it relevant, making it tied to local issues so that young people learn about democracy and also be engaged in strengthening democracy so that democracy doesn't become a negative word for the future generations. And there's plenty out there for people to feel a little bit disappointed with democracy, but if we give up, then there's not going to be any democracy. We have to really put our part, and our young people are central to that work. So let's make sure we engage them in the process of democracy. Okay? I hope it has been a great learning experience for all of you. I thank all the speakers, of course, and the moderators, and Scott Warren, our keynote speaker, who traveled from New York City for a great keynote. Let's please give them the panelists and the speakers a round. I also want to thank Liz and Nelson with the Hartford Public Library. Liz is over there. Liz, thank you so much. And now we're going to start with the swearing in. Before that, at the very end, we're going to be taking a group photo. So please don't leave after the swearing in for the group photo that we're going to take and put it on our website and so on. So let's start. Let's with the Civic Ambassadors pledge. Ready? Okay.
As a civic ambassador, I pledge to be a dedicated and engaged member of my community who will uphold civic values of civility, respect for our democratic institutions, principles of social justice, and nonpartisan civic action that will improve my community. I further pledge that in every role in which I may hold influence, I will carry forth the message that civic participation is a transformative experience that benefits us as individuals, our communities, and our democracy. I further pledge to devote at least 1 hour a week to working with others across differences to create opportunities for civic participation and engage those I come in contact with in endeavors that will strengthen Connecticut's civic health. Lastly, as a civic ambassador, I pledge to share stories of my civic action work with others as a way to be a super carrier of great civic citizenship who inspires others to follow my example for the betterment